for dialing in. My name is Alex Morozov. I am the board member of CFA Netherlands Waarbij Society. I am currently involved in a membership committee for the board. My daytime job is I'm a director of equity research for Morningstar. So here to just briefly introduce the local society, and then before I turn over to Jonathan, just wanted to give you a few quick introductory remarks. The CFA Society now of the Netherlands. I've been a member of this ever since moving to Amsterdam 6-7 years ago, and it's a fairly large society. It's a great place for you to meet like-minded individuals, folks in the financial services industry. It's a society that prides itself on very active membership base. We organize numerous events from networking to content-oriented and soft skill events. We have roughly 2,000 members in the financial sector community. So in addition to all those wonderful networking events, we are also very much involved with the mentorship program. Mentorship programs that are actually that fall under my purview as a board member of the society. So if you're interested in getting a little bit more involved, obviously as you're just starting to prep for the level 2, it's perhaps you're thinking, well, it may be a little bit too early for me to get involved with the society. But I actually say it's never too early. First of all, that if you join the society as a candidate, there is a pretty attractive candidate membership. It's a special candidate membership. It's not the same as regular membership. This will give you access to all the society events that are mostly free for members, and also free participation in a biannual live mock exam. The next one will take place for all CFA levels on November 14th in Amsterdam. So I wanted to mention that because it's a great opportunity for you to get involved with a society, even at this early stage, even before you complete all the 3 levels of the CFA program. So I'm not going to spend too much more time talking about it. So as I said, my job here is to primarily introduce Jonathan. But if you have any questions about the local society, if you are thinking about potentially enrolling as a candidate, so if you're interested in getting more information on candidate membership, please feel free to reach out to either Helen or myself, and we will be able to answer any of your questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to Jonathan.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Alex. Okay, so we're here to do 2 things today. A quick little session, 15 to 20 minutes on study techniques, just to make sure you're studying the right way, especially for those of you that are just starting on your level 2 journey, because I know some of you might be doing it for December. Well, fingers crossed you're doing it for December. I actually teach London classes, and of course all my candidates in London have just had their December exams cancelled, so they're going to be delayed until May, unfortunately. As we said, at the moment the Netherlands exam is still destined to go ahead, but you need to keep on checking the CFA Institute website. They do have the anticipation that there will be further cancellations. Now, I'll cross my fingers for you guys that it isn't your test centre. Now, what we're going to do today, I'm going to have a look at 2 things, really. What we're going to do is, let me just get hopefully into screen share mode. Good, I am sharing my screen. We're going to do 2 little presentations. First of all, the first presentation is just on exam effective study, just to make sure you are studying in the most effective way. Now, at level 1, generally you can almost get away with level 1 with inefficient study. But once you get to level 2, and level 2 is really known as the really tough level of the CFA, you need to make sure you are using your time the most effectively. So I'll talk a little bit there about what study techniques are proven to work and what study techniques aren't. So you can just make sure you're not falling into any traps. Only be about 15, 20 minutes. Then after that, we're going to jump into a derivative session, and we're going to be looking at two things. We're going to be looking at forward rate agreements, FRAs. So we'll ask ourselves, what are they? What can they be used for? And then we'll look at pricing and valuing them. And then after we've done FRAs, we'll then move into looking at swaps. We'll look at an interest rate swap, a currency swap, and an equity swap. And if we've got time towards the end, we'll have a little look at a question as well. Okay, so let's start off with a little bit of effective study. As I said, I'm not planning on spending too long on this, but just be aware, even though level 2 is the valuation paper, you're still expecting about 60% of the questions in the exam to be wordy and about 40% to be actually computational based. So that does mean where you do have computations and equations in the syllabus, make sure you haven't just learned those formulas and you actually understand what they're doing, because you're as likely, if not more likely, to be tested on where are the strengths and where are the weaknesses of the computation as you are crunching numbers. So make sure you keep that split. It's very easy at level 2 to get sucked towards the computation because there is a little bit more computation in the syllabus than at level 1. Once we get to level 3, the amount of computations drops back the other way, so it actually becomes smaller. So minimum passing score, your minimum passing score, I always tell my candidates, you're aiming to get 70%, not initially, of course. If you can get 70% when you're doing practice and mock examinations in the last couple of weeks leading up into the exam, then you've got a great chance of passing. Reality is, we know the CFA Institute have never failed a candidate scoring over 70%. So therefore, the pass mark is actually going to be lower than that. In level 2, if it's a particularly challenging exam, it's going to be in the low 60s. If it's a relatively easier exam, it's likely to be in the mid 60s. So in reality, if you can get yourself into the 60% range by the time you come to take your exam, you've got a really good chance of passing. And you need to be focusing on that when you get to the review phase of your studies. So let's have a quick look, just for those of you that aren't aware, these are the pass rates for the CFA Institute exams. These are global pass rates, and they include everybody attending the exam day globally. Okay, so it doesn't include people that sign up for the exam and then don't turn up on the day because they realize they're underprepared. And when we look at level 2, you can see that it's around about, at the moment, mid-40s. And of course, that then causes people to be a little panicked because they think, well, actually, look, level 1 was only was low 40s. So we've already got rid of, almost 60% of people before we get to level 2. And then of those 40% that pass level 1, only 40% are going on to pass level 2. Reality is, I think what this really tells you is you need to be really focused on your study techniques to ensure a pass at level 2. Okay, it's very, very doable, but not if you study inefficiently. So let's talk about the study commitment. You hear 300 hours all the time. Now, where that 300 hours actually comes from is a survey, the exit survey that the CFA Institute do. And actually, this is the 2018 survey, which was the most recent data I could get. And actually, you can see for the level 2 exam, the average is 328 hours. Okay, not 300 hours. So 300 hours is a little bit of a rounding down when we talk about level 2. And that is the average studied by CFA level 2 candidates. Now, just return to the previous slide, the average candidate does not pass. Okay, look, slightly more than 50% of people passing. So if you end up studying more than 300 hours, that is not unusual at level 2. Now, one of the dangers I do find at level 2 is a lot of people come in from level 1 and they say, yeah, you said 300 hours would apply at level 1. I got away with far less. I think I can do that again at level 2. Actually, I put myself in that category. I got away with a lot less than 300 hours at level 1, but that was predominantly because I was coming from a very relevant background. So my background is econometrics degree, so that was econ and quant taken care of. I've a chartered accountancy qualification, ACA qualification, so that was FRA taken care of. I was working in corporate finance when I took my exam, so I was very comfortable with valuation methodology. So there wasn't much in the level 1 exam that was new to me, to be honest. And as a result, I really managed to shortcut that 300 hours fairly significantly. Now, I did not find that to be the case at level 2. Much more of the level 2 syllabus was brand new to me, stuff that I hadn't encountered in previous studies. And as a result, I was much, much closer to that 300 hours. So it's just a little word of warning. If you got away with less than 300 hours at level 1, don't necessarily expect that to be the case at level 2. Now, you can see level 1 was all about core financial knowledge. Level 2 is advanced financial knowledge. Now, there's no real technical difficulty change between levels 2 and levels 3. It's just a difference in focus. Level 2 is a bit more sell-side focused, so it's focusing on asset valuation, whereas level 3 is more buy-side focused, so it's much more about the fund management process. Okay. So don't expect, therefore, to see a difficulty change between levels 2 and levels 3. But, of course, you guys are progressing from level 1 to level 2, and you will probably notice that the level 2 material is technically more demanding than the level 1 material. So it is harder, coupled with, of course, a harder exam style. Now that we're looking at item sets, where you get a vignette, which is a series of information, tables, paragraphs of text, etc. And then you're asked either 6 or 4 related questions to that. Okay. And that item set format means it's harder. It's a harder exam. Whereas level 1, every question was standalone. Now, essentially at level 2, you've got these item sets, and it means actually only around about a third of what you study at level 2 gets tested on exam day, whereas you have much more of an even spread at level 1. So what that does mean is if a topic comes up and you're unprepared at level 2, it's going to have a much more dramatic impact on your chances of passing. So you do need to be more prepared. Okay, the exam style is more challenging, the technical difficulty is higher than level 1, and the volume is about the same. Right, let's talk about things that don't work, that people do all the time in their CFA studies. So we have learning scientists at Kaplan Swayze. These are essentially professors that really study how people learn and then try and apply it to the CFA program. So these are techniques that have no effectiveness: reading and rereading. Now, obviously, you have to read the material to get an awareness of it the first time through. But what then people do is they will constantly turn and reread the material. And what they think they're getting is they think they're getting more technically competent with the material. And that's not actually what happens with endless rereading. What actually happens with endless rereading is you become more familiar with the material. Now, familiarity should not be confused with understanding, okay? You'll think you understand it better just because you recognize it, because you've seen it more. It doesn't mean you've actually understood it. Also, issue with reading is it's not really how the memory works. People say, okay, I'm going to read it and I'm going to reread it because that will help me remember it. Well, actually, the evidence is pretty weak. It does obviously help to reread if you want to improve your memory, but there are much better techniques that we can be using. And you can prove this to yourself if you want. Take a couple of pages in your CFA Institute material or Swayze material, whatever you're using, read them tonight, and then try and remember what you read on Monday. Okay, so next Monday. And trust me, you will struggle to remember the topic you read, let alone the fine details and the minutiae. So reading and rereading is not very effective in terms of developing understanding, and it's not very effective in terms of retaining information. Underlining and highlighting, I love this. People underline, and in particular highlighters, they highlight stuff in their study notes. In particular, if they've got the Swayze book hard copies, candidates will come up to me with kind of books that almost glow in the dark. And I always say, well, you've highlighted. They pretty much highlight everything other than the words and the. And the reason people do it is they say it helps them with retention. It helps them with memory. Again, there's absolutely no evidence that that is the case. Really, the only thing that underlining and highlighting will do to your books is allow you to read them in slightly lower light. Okay, so it just does not work. Summarization. Now, this is the deadly trap, especially at level 2. And what we mean really here is note-taking. Now, note-taking, why do people take notes? I think it's because that's what they did at university, okay? And they're familiar with it. So it's a safe place. It's a comfortable place. Oh, yeah, this is how I study. This is what I did at university. And hey, look, I got my degree. But again, when we actually look at the science behind note taking, does it actually improve understanding and retention? The answer is it's slightly better than reading alone, but only slightly. And the major problem with note taking is how long it takes. It's just going to burn up so much time. And the problem with the CFA syllabus is, as you've experienced already at level 1, and some of you doing December will be more than aware of at level 2, is the huge volumes. It will just take you ages to make your own notes. So, I'm not saying you can't take any notes, but what I'm really saying is absolute brief notes, bullet points. You cannot afford to rewrite the Institute's material in your own handwriting. You will just not have enough time to do this. And essentially, if you end up taking too many notes, it always comes at the expense of question practice. I'm going to talk more about that later. Your use of imagery and keyword mnemonics. These are effective memory tools for other exams. Major problem for the CFA Institute exams is we're often testing understanding rather than can you just regurgitate knowledge, okay? And the idea is mnemonics are good for learning lists, etc. So is imagery for text-based learning, but it doesn't really help you with understanding in any way, shape or form. So yes, useful in some exams, but not really the CFA. So let's start talking about things that are proven to work. Number one, when you're reading, try elaborative interrogation and self-explanation. I wrap these two together. Basically what this means is you read a couple of pages in the material, okay, whether that's the Institute material or the Swayze study notes. You read a couple of pages, you close the book, and then you say to yourself, okay, what did I just read? And what you're going to try and do is explain it back to yourself in your own words. Now, why do this? It's shown to do a number of things. Number one, explaining it back to yourself in your own words immediately demonstrates whether you understood the material or not. Because if you can't explain it to yourself, you didn't understand the material. Number two, it's shown to aid retention, okay? The effort of actually trying to convert it into your own words and make sense of it, that is brilliant for burning the neural pathways and aiding on retention. With retention, the basic rule is the harder you work to recall something, the more effective retention becomes. In other words, if you really struggle to recall something once, then actually you can recall it easier later on. Okay, so make sure you try a bit of elaborative interrogation and self-explanation when you're reading. You will get much greater benefits than simply reading alone. Interleaved learning. Now, interleaved learning means testing all areas of the syllabus simultaneously, rather than, let's say, I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks studying FRA, then I'm going to study fixed income, etc. Okay, that's what they mean by blocked learning. So they say block learning, so studying each subject one at a time. Now, in reality, what we tend to suggest is you start off with block learning whilst you're working your way through the material. Then with about 1.5 to 2 months remaining, then you switch towards review. And when you start doing mock and practice exams, you will be testing all the areas simultaneously, okay? And the key point is that's when your retention will come together. I hear a lot of people very concerned, and this will apply to maybe some of you December takers, very concerned when they're moving into the last couple of months before the exam. The number one thing I hear from candidates is, hey, I understood most of it when I looked at it, but I can remember nothing. Now, that's the position you want to be in about a month and a half to 2 months out. That whole period from that point onwards is about revision or review, and it's all about building the retention, building the familiarity, okay, working on exam technique. You'll find that retention comes together in those final months, as you do interleaved learning, as you do mock examinations. Distributed practice, this is the old classic where you hear people say, I'm a crammer. I leave my study until the last minute because that's the most effective study for me. Well, again, lots and lots of academic tests have been done on this, and it's just shown absolutely not to be the case ever that cramming is better. It does have, though, look, very short-term benefits. So I think there is some value in cramming in the week before the exam. What I used to do the week before the exam is go through, each evening I'd go through a kind of wordy area of the exam. So maybe ESG and corporate governance, I'd read that the week before the exam. The ethics material, I'd read that again in the week before the exam. Anything that was particularly wordy. there's a fair amount of portfolio management that fits into that category as well. Why? I just wanted to cram it into my short-term memory in the hope I'd pick up an extra couple of marks in the exam. But in terms of developing an understanding of the entire CFA syllabus, cramming is shown not to be effective because it is so short-term. Much better spreading learning over time. Now, the number one thing, though, that you can be doing to prepare for the exam in terms of aiding your understanding and aiding your retention is taking questions, doing question practice, okay? Now, candidates often don't want to do this. I hear candidates coming up to me and saying, I don't feel ready to do questions yet. And I'm always amazed. You're ready from day one of your CFA studies to do questions. I'm not particularly worried whether you get those questions right, as long as you're learning from the questions. So in other words, doing questions, making mistakes, working out where we went wrong, okay, that's how we improve, and that's how our retention actually works. You know, facing a question, not knowing how to tackle it, looking at the solution and going, oh man, they used, I don't know, 3-stage dividend discount modeling or something. And then next time you see a similar question, you're like, aha, okay, I remember I couldn't do this last time, and I remember what they did. So you will find your understanding and your retention, most importantly, massively improves the more questions you do. It is by far, again, academic evidence backs this up. It is by far the most effective use of time. Okay, but candidates don't want to do that. They want to read, they want to watch videos, they want to make notes at the expense of question practice. And it should always be the other way around. Question practice should always come first if you want to make your route through the CFA exams the easiest route possible. Okay, so as I said, here's our fatal mistake. A fatal mistake, a lot of candidates want to spend 70% or more of their time note-taking, reading, watching videos, and less than 30% of their time practicing questions. And in fact, most of that 30%, they end load. So it's in the last couple of months. Okay, no, I want you to be doing questions almost from day one of your studies. Okay, you want to be spending about 70% or more of your time on question practice to be the most efficient with your studies. Now, again, 70-30, I don't really care too much about, as long as you're focusing here on, the more time I can spend on question practice, the better, then that, of course, is the lesson here. And as I said, getting questions wrong and working out why is a very, very effective tool for retention and understanding. So you're really going to build your retention and understanding by doing this. Okay, so we work on at Kaplan Swayze on a prepare, practice, perform framework, and I'm just going to give you a quick lowdown on that. So prepare and practice. Prepare is the kind of reading, the watching videos, and practice is using question banks. Now, of course, if you're a Swayze customer, you'll have the Swayze Q Bank at your disposal. But if you are not, of course, then remember you will have the CFA Institute Q Bank at your disposal. So really, you're doing prepare and practice all the way from the start of your studies until about 2 months before the exam. 2 months before the exam, you're going to change the focus and you're going to start looking at revision. So your focus during prepare and practice is all about understanding the technical material, okay, and then reinforcing that understanding via question practice. So, of course, all the tools you have at your disposal here, the Swayze study notes, the CFA curriculum, videos, classes, and, of course, both sources of QBanks, the Swayze Pro QBank, and, of course, the CFA QBanks. So constantly be building your self-test. And a very good idea here is after you've studied a few subjects, so maybe you've done, let's say, quants, econ, FRA, then every couple of weeks to build yourself a test on the subject areas that you've already studied. Now, what you'll find that this does is it will stop that knowledge fading away. It will keep that retention level up. Now, during the prepare and practice phase, about 50% of your time should be spent reading, note-taking, watching videos, and about 50% of your time on question practice. And you're aiming really to score above 70% on the questions that you're attempting before moving on to the next topic area. Okay. Now, notice we mentioned about leaving ethics till last. Ethics, I tended to leave until the last subject. just before I wanted to first take my first practice exams, mock exams, because a lot of the ethics material is, number one, common sense. Number two, the bits that aren't common sense are all about using your memory. And if you study it first, by the time you come to apply it when you're doing mock examinations, you will have forgotten about it. And remember, during this prepare practice phase, you are working on your technical understanding. You are not getting too worried about recall and retention, because what we're going to do is focus on that, okay, in the final month. So once you've got to the final couple of months, so 2 months out, 1.5 months, then your focus becomes perform. Now it's going to be really important to test your knowledge on proper item sets. So up until now, it doesn't matter whether you're studying using standalone questions, absolutely fine, because you're just working on your technical knowledge. A couple of months out, it's all about item sets. It's all about exam technique. So we're going to need at least 1.5 to 2 months here, because we're going to be working on our recall of material, okay, and developing our exam technique, okay, and of course trying to identify weaker topic areas. And we're going to do that via question practice. But this time it's all about doing mocks and practice exams. So if you're a Swayzer customer, you've got the 4 Swayzer practice exams. Of course, there is a Swayzer mock that is provided via the society. So you can speak to Helene about that. CFA Institutes provides mock exams at level 2 as well. Normally it's 1 or 2. It depends on the sitting whether they provide more than one. I know they did at level 1, but often at level 2 it's just the one CFA mock exam. Okay, so I think if you are studying purely with the Institute's material, it is definitely worthwhile seeking out a prep provider like Swayzer, but there are other ones out there. In order to be neutral, the other ones, big ones are Wiley and Mark Meldrum, are probably our biggest competitors. Okay, it's worth getting mocks from these guys if you haven't got access at the moment. You're going to need more than one mock exam to practice on. You really are. Okay, and be aware that we actually do run a 5-day exam review course. Okay, so a 5-day exam review course is run in Amsterdam, and that is run via a company called Top Finance. They use Swayzer presenters, often me at level 2 actually. Okay, but it's run by Top Finance, and typically that runs in April, or it has run in April before when we faced a June exam. I know actually for the December, I think it's switched to online. Because obviously with COVID can't meet up at the moment. It's switched to online, and that is taking place in the next couple of weeks. Right, okay, so what do you want to do in these final 2 months? Take a practice exam or mock to time. Now, the first exam that you do, I'm not really worried about your overall score. What you're going to do is just use it to see how you score in each of the topic areas. In other words, how did I do in FRA? How did I do in quant? How did I do in econ, etc.? You're just trying to highlight where your strengths and weaknesses lie. Okay. Now, if you realize you've got a weak area, that's when essentially you use your online Q banks. So you take the practice exam and do it to time. Okay. Now, if you're doing the December exam, just be aware, guys, that you are actually having to do it with a face covering. So I would make sure I've practiced wearing a face covering for an entire 3-hour CFA exam if I was going to go into that December exam. You don't want to find out, for example, that your glasses steam up or you can't breathe properly on exam day. You want to know all about those problems beforehand. So make sure you've practiced doing a mock paper to time. Okay, so very important you practice to time, because you've got to make sure your exam technique is sufficient to get through the entire paper and maximize your scores. Okay, now, when I talk about exam technique, it's very important that you look at each item set and you try and go for the easiest marks first. What a lot of candidates will do is they'll just try and work sequentially through the item set. Problem with that is if question 1 is really, really hard, you burn up a lot of time, you start to get a bit panicked, and then maybe you drop marks that were easier to pick up. So again, just like level 1, level 2 is each question is standalone, even within an item set. So if you get a question wrong in an item set, it shouldn't affect your ability to do the next question within an item set. So when you're looking at item sets, make sure you're looking for the easiest marks. Rule I always used when I was doing this was, first thing I did in an item set is I would look at the questions. Then I would go and actually review the material. Okay, now the reason I did it that way is because essentially what you tend to find is if you read the material first, then look at the questions, you've then got to go back and reread the material to find out where the information was to answer each part of the question. So it's more effective to look at the questions first and then the material. And when I'm looking at the questions, I'm drawing up a rough plan in my mind. What looks like the easiest marks? Often the wordy bits are easier to answer, or at least quicker to answer than the computations. So I was looking for anything that looked easy, anything that looked quick, and anything I thought was difficult or time-consuming, I was leaving to the end of the item set. Now remember, you're going to have a blend of 4 question item sets, which means you've got 12 minutes to answer those 4 questions, and 6 question item sets, meaning you've got 18 minutes. Stick to time for each item set. Make sure you're timing each item set, and at the end of the 12 minutes or 18 minutes, move on to the next item set. Okay, now, of course, you're reviewing your topic performance, how you did on each topic, to try and spot weak topics, okay? And very important that you spend as long as you did taking the exam, debriefing it. You're going over every question that you got incorrect and every question that you guessed on. Why? Okay, well, of course, you want to learn from your mistakes here. You want to make sure that if a similar question comes up again, you don't make the same mistake. So very, very important to debrief thoroughly. This is where you get the value. This is where you get the improved retention and the improved recall, okay, by debriefing thoroughly. Now, if you realize you've got a weak area, so let's say every time, you've tackled a swap question, you score badly, that's when to get your Q banks out, CFA Institute, Swayze Q banks, whatever you want, okay, and build yourself a test purely on that area. Hammer a number of questions, okay, in the Q banks, then come back, do another mock. When that topic comes up again, do you see an improvement? Your aim, as I said, is to get above 70% in the couple of weeks before the exam. Reality is, if you can be in the 60s, you've got a good chance of passing. Now, during these last month and a half to 2 months, you want about 90% of your time focused in on question practice and only 10% note-taking, reading, watching videos. In fact, really, you're only going back to the textbooks at this stage if you get something wrong and you look at the answers and you don't understand them, because that's showing you've got a knowledge gap. If you get something wrong, okay, you look at the answer and you go, oh, man, I should have got that. Well, that's just saying you need more questions to really solidify that, really make sure that knowledge is solid in your mind. But if you're looking at a question, looking at a solution and not understanding it, that's saying knowledge gap. Go back to the material. Okay. Right, okay, so that was the end of the effective study area of this. As I said, really important that you study properly for these exams to maximize your chances. And the number of candidates that I encounter that just don't study effectively, it's really quite frightening. Right, okay, so now really into the meat of this for the next hour and a half, 2 hours. And what we're going to look at essentially is the material sitting in study session 14, which is our derivatives material. Now, we're going to be looking at 2 areas here. We're going to be looking at forward rate agreements, FRAs, and we'll be looking at our 3 types of swap: the interest rate swap, the equity swap, and the currency swap. Why have I chosen these areas? Simply because I've been teaching CFA and CFA level 2 for, I don't know, 20 years now. It makes me feel old. And these are the areas I know cause candidates the most problems. So that's why we've chosen these areas. So let's start with our forward rate agreement, our FRA. Okay, now what is a forward rate agreement? An agreement to borrow or lend in the future. Okay, so it's not borrowing or lending today. At T0, we're going to start the borrowing and lending at some future date. Now, when we look at FRAs, they're interest rate products, okay, and they are based on LIBOR, the London Interbank Offer Rate. Now, in practice, different currencies, LIBORs, have different day counts. So, for example, dollar LIBOR, I think, is 360, sterling LIBOR is 365. In our exam, we are always going to assume 30 days in a month, and 360 days in the year, regardless of the currency we're looking at for our LIBOR. Again, the last thing the examiner is interested in is can you know the day counts for different currencies? Just doesn't care about that kind of thing. Okay, so let's have a look at the notation for FRAs. They're written like this, a 2 times 3 FRA. So you've got two numbers there, and it's in months. So 2 months times 3 months. And the first date you're seeing is the expiry date. This is the date the FRA expires. What's the significance about the FRA expiring? Well, that is when you start to borrow and lend, okay? And this date, the second date, is the end of the borrowing and lending period. Okay, it's actually notional borrowing and lending. We don't actually borrow and lend. Notional borrowing and lending. Okay, so a 2 times 3 FRA means we've got a FRA that expires in 2 months, and then essentially we've got borrowing and lending from the end of month 2 up until the end of month 3. So we're looking at 1 month borrowing and lending commencing in 2 months' time. Okay, you can see that down here, a 30-day loan, 60 days from now. Okay, let's make sure we feel totally comfortable with that. So the way a FRA works is you find out the price of the FRA today. Now, the price in a FRA is going to be the fixed rate. What we're going to see is long FRA is a commitment to pay fixed, receive floating from the FRA's expiry to the end of the borrowing lending period. And the short FRA is just going to be the other way around. So a short FRA is going to be a commitment to pay floating and receive fixed. Okay. So for every FRA, you've got two counterparties, one's long, one's short. Okay, so we're looking at a 2 times 3 FRA. So up front, we find out the forward price, which is the fixed rate. Okay, now, that interest rate doesn't apply now. It's going to apply from FRA expiry, and a FRA expiry, of course, is in 60 days' time. Okay, so expiry of the FRA, that's when the borrowing and lending period starts. So in other words, if we're long this FRA, okay, so let's say we're long our FRA, we're going to be paying fixed, receiving floating from day 60 to day 90. The fixed rate we know at T0, okay, today. But we don't know what the floating rate is. The floating rate is only going to be discovered at FRA expiry. Okay, so note, at the expiry of the FRA, that's when we find out what 60-day LIBOR is that spans this period here, our borrowing and lending period. So we don't know the floating rate at T0, but we do know the fixed rate. Okay. Okay, so we've already said 3 months is, of course, the end of the notional borrowing and lending. So this FRA is borrowing and lending between day 60 and day 90. Okay, in other words, the long party will be paying fixed, receiving floating. Oops, let me just close my door. My dog's trying to get in here. So, sorry, being attacked by a Labrador. Okay, so my long FRA is pay fixed, receive floating from day 60 to day 90, and my short FRA will be pay floating, receive fixed, day 60 to day 90. Okay, so 30 days borrowing and lending commencing in 60 days' time in a 2 times 3 FRA. Now, as we said, long FRA, pay fixed, receive floating. Odd, it doesn't actually ever say that in the Institute's material, okay? But it's absolutely critical to understanding it. A long FRA is pay fixed, receive floating from the FRA's expiry date to the end of the borrowing and lending period, okay? And a short FRA, other way around, pay floating and receive fixed from FRA expiry to the end of the borrowing and lending period. Right, okay, so we kind of know what a FRA is, but what on earth might we use them for? Now, again, this isn't actually particularly mentioned in the CFA level 2 material, but I think it is useful. Okay, it's useful to know to put this in some kind of context. Now, first of all, you can use them for speculation. Why? Because the value of a long FRA will gain when interest rates rise, and that's because fixed rates on new FRAs will be increasing over that period. Whereas short FRAs will gain when interest rates fall, and that's because the fixed rate would be falling over that period. Okay, so in other words, if you think interest rates are going to rise, one way of speculating on that would be to take out a long FRA and see its value increase over time as the fixed rate goes up. Looks like I'm failing to keep my Labrador out. I'm just going to hope she's quiet in the background. Okay, so long FRAs can be used to speculate if you've got a view that interest rates are going to rise, and short FRAs can be used to speculate if you think interest rates are going to fall. But another major use of our FRAs is to lock into a fixed rate for borrowing, so future borrowing. So we've got a scenario here. Let's try and close that door. I think my daughter is removing the hound as we speak. Okay, so imagine you've got a company and it's going to have to borrow in the future. Now, most companies, when it comes to borrowing, they borrow from high street banks, retail banks. And most banks lend at variable rates, not fixed rates. So a lot of companies do not have access to fixed rate borrowings. So we've got a company, it's going to have to borrow in the future and it's going to have to borrow at a variable rate. Its worry, its risk, of course, is interest rate risk. In other words, by the time it comes to take out its loan in the future, interest rates have gone up and it costs more to borrow. So what a company can do is it can use a FRA to lock into a guaranteed fixed rate in the future, even though it's only got access to floating funds. So let's have a little example of this. So we've got company A. It needs to borrow $10 million for 6 months, starting in 3 months' time. Okay, so in other words, it's going to take out a 6-month loan, but that loan doesn't start until day 90. Okay. So it approaches its bank and the bank says, okay, we're willing to lend at LIBOR plus 60 basis points. So this will be 180-day LIBOR because remember, they're borrowing for 6 months. Okay, so 180 days. So they'll say, okay, well, we'll wait until 3 months pass, and then we'll grant you a loan at whatever 180-day LIBOR is plus 60 basis points as a margin. Now, of course, the big risk that company A has is over that 3-month period leading up to them taking out the borrowings, that LIBOR starts to rise. 180-day LIBOR rises, and then when they take out their loan, it's more expensive. So our company, of course, has decided that it wants to eliminate interest rate risk. Now, of course, when you eliminate interest rate risk, you eliminate both upside and downside. On the flip side, whilst, of course, our company's got the risk that 180-day LIBOR rises over that 3-month period, there is also the potential, of course, that 180-day LIBOR falls over that 3-month period. Now, essentially, if you eliminate interest rate risk, you eliminate both sides of this, the upside and the downside. So here's our company. Okay, they are going to take out a 6-month floating rate loan starting in 3 months' time. And there's the details of the loan. It's going to be 180-day LIBOR in 3 months' time plus 60 basis points. Now, our company wants to eliminate the risk. So what they're going to do is take out a FRA with the same borrowing and lending period. Now, notice we've got starting in 3 months' time, so 3 months, and then lasting for 6 months. So we need a 3 times 9 FRA. Okay, so that would cover the 180 days from month 3 up to month 9, a 3 times 9 FRA. So we're going to go long in this situation, a 3 times 9 FRA. That will give us the obligation. Remember, it's a contract, not an option, a contract. So this will give us the obligation to pay fixed, receive floating. Now, when we take this out at T0 today, we find out the forward price is 5%. Remember, that is the fixed rate. Now, what that means is our company now, when it comes to borrowing in 3 months' time, is always going to pay 5% plus the 60 basis point spread the bank is charging above LIBOR. Okay, in other words, our company is locking into 5.6%. Let's see why. So let's imagine that 3 months have passed and the company comes to take out its loan. And let's say that LIBOR is now 7%. So they'll be paying 7% plus 60 basis points. Okay. So they'll be paying 7.6% on their loan. But remember, the FRA gives them the obligation to pay fixed. Well, that fixed rate is 5%. And receive floating. Well, we said floating was 7%. So in other words, a net 2% is going to come in on the FRA. So they're paying 7.6% on their loan. They're receiving 2% on the FRA. Overall, 5.6%. So they've locked into 5.6% now, even if short-term LIBOR, 180-day LIBOR rises over the period. Now, of course, they've also locked into 5.6% if LIBOR was to fall over the period. Let me just change my ink coloring. So let's imagine that now LIBOR is, let's say, 3%. Okay, so in terms of their bank loan will be 3% plus the 60 basis point margin. They'll be paying 3.6% on their bank loan. But on the FRA, they would be paying 5, receiving 3. This time, they've got a net plus 2%. Okay, so in other words, this time they pay 3.6% when they take out their loan. They're paying a net 2% on the FRA, and lo and behold, they've locked into 5.6%. So that's one of the big uses of FRAs for companies. Essentially, what they're going to do is that it's going to allow them to lock into fixed rates when they've only got access to floating funds. Right, okay, so let's get into the real level 2 stuff. What they want you to do in level 2 is price the FRA and then value the FRA. Okay, now, what is the price of the FRA? We've already mentioned it. It is the fixed rate. And remember, we discover this up front when we take out the FRA at T0, at today's date. Okay, now, what it is an implied forward rate. Now, the good news is you've been calculating forward rates at level 1 and at level 2 in fixed income. Okay, and in fact, in fixed income, computing a forward rate is more complicated because it's essentially based on bond yields, and yields are effective interest rates. Here would be being based everything on LIBOR, and LIBOR is an add-on yield. It's not an effective interest rate. In other words, there's no compounding involved. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So for our FRA, remember, the FRA is pay fixed, receive floating from the FRA expiry to the end of the notional borrowing and lending period. Okay, so in our 2 times 3 FRA, our FRA expires in day 60, okay, and the end of the borrowing and lending period is at day 90. Okay, so in other words, we've got a 30-day loan commencing in 60 days' time. Now, beautiful thing is, of course, that means if we've got 60-day LIBOR and 90-day LIBOR, what we can do is calculate a 30-day forward rate commencing in 60 days' time. And that's where we're going to right now. Okay, so given the following LIBOR term structure, calculate the fixed rate on the following FRA. So we've got a 1 times 3 FRA. Okay, so 1 day 30, 3 day 90, length of time between that, of course, is 60 days. So we're looking at a 60-day borrowing and lending period commencing in 30 days' time. Okay, now, sorry, that looks rather like I've written 96 there. That was my rubbish attempt at a 0. Okay, now, in order to do this, you are going to need to know LIBOR up until expiry and LIBOR up until the end of the borrowing and lending period. They often throw this one in here to try and catch you out because they're thinking, oh, look, this FRA is for 60-day borrowing and lending, okay? So, but remember, it's 60-day borrowing and lending, not from T0. It's 60-day borrowing and lending from day 30 to day 90. This rate here is from T0 to T60, and therefore is completely irrelevant, okay? So we want the LIBOR rate up until expiry, and we want the LIBOR rate up until the end of the borrowing and lending period. Now, of course, the next thing to be aware of when we look at FRAs is that the interest rates are always quoted annually. Well, of course, any interest rate is quoted annually, so we need to unannualize. Now, the good news is, because we're dealing with LIBOR here, unannualizing is very, very straightforward. So let's deannualize or unannualize. So our 30-day rate, what we've got is 2.4%, so we'll be using that to circle it. And our 90-day rate was 3%. So those are the rates we're going to use. So first things that we need to do is take our 2.4% and unannualize it. There's my 2.4% as a decimal, 0.024. And to unannualize it, all I need to do is multiply by 30 over 360. So 30 being the number of days it applies to, and 360 being the number of days in a year. And that gives me 0.02. Okay, I'm going to do exactly the same for 90-day rate. That was 3%. This time I'm going to multiply by 90 over 360, and I get 0.075. Note, no compounding here. Okay, it's not like fixed income where you've got to worry about compound interest. Here we're dealing with LIBOR. It's an add-on rate. It uses simple interest, so we can unannualize without worrying about compounding, essentially. Okay, so that's step one done. Now, what I'm then going to try and do is now compute the forward rate as 1 plus the long period rate, this rate, okay, divided by 1 plus the short period rate, okay, and then I'm going to subtract the 1 that I'd added. That will then give me my 60-day forward rate. And then last thing, again, with FRAs, their fixed rate will be annualized. So even though it applies to a 60-day borrowing and lending period, it will be quoted as an annualized interest rate. So I'm going to need to annualize, and that's going to be fairly straightforward. Okay, so let's have a quick look at this. What we're really saying is, look, 1.002, okay, so 1 plus 30-day LIBOR unannualized. And here we've got 1 plus 90-day LIBOR unannualized. And we're going to say, okay, this is going to be 1 plus our 60-day forward rate. And our argument is this times this. So 1.002 times 1 plus the 60-day forward rate has to equal that. Why? To prevent arbitrage. Okay. So once we've got that, all we're really saying is, 1.002 times 1 plus F60, I'll put them in brackets, be a good boy, okay, equals 1.0075. And then all we're trying to do is isolate this term here to calculate our forward rate. In other words, we could easily say, therefore, 1 plus the F60 rate equals 1.0075 over 1.00. I missed out. I don't miss out a 2 there. That looks. Let me just check myself. No, I didn't. No, I'm fine. Good. Good. Okay. 1.002. And okay. Now, notice that is 1 plus the forward rate. So then you just subtract 1 from both sides. Okay. So that's what we're doing essentially here. Now, easy way to remember, if you don't like that, is just to say it's always 1 plus the long period rate divided by 1 plus the short period rate. So this relates to 90 days, so that's going to be on the top. The shorter rate, this relates to 30 days, that's going to be on the bottom. So 1 plus your 90-day rate divided by 1 plus your 30-day rate, subtract the 1 that you added, that will give you F60. Now this little term here is simply annualizing. Okay, even spelt it with a Z there to sound American. Okay, so look, actually our borrowing and lending period here is 60 days, as we've mentioned before. Okay, that's our borrowing and lending period. So what we then got to say is, well, how many 60-day periods in a year? 360 days in a year, remember our basic assumption. Divide through by 60, and that tells me 6. Okay, so this is going to come down to 6. So I'm taking my 60-day forward rate, multiplying by 6, and that gives me the forward rate that will be quoted in the marketplace. Everything's got to be annualized. So therefore, the forward price on this FRA is 3.3%. Very common calculation to be asked to do in the actual exam, so make sure you're prepared to do that. Okay, so yes, it is an implied forward rate. It is the FRA's price. It is the fixed rate. Okay, so remember, we fixed rate, therefore it's quoted for us here at T0. We do not discover what the floating rate is until the expiry of the FRA, which in this case would be at day 30. Right, okay, next thing is, what about valuing a FRA at maturity? Okay, so the FRA has gone all the way up to expiry. That's what we mean. Okay, maturity is simply another word for expiry. And we're going to stick with our 1 times 3 FRA. So expiry, of course, remember, was day 30. So what we're trying to do, therefore, is work out the value at day 30 here. We know what our forward price was. We just calculated it. Our forward price was 3.3%. 30 days have now passed. Okay, so we're now at contract expiration in 30 days' time, and we're told that 60-day rates are 4%. Now remember, at FRA expiration, that is when we've got, remember, because this is a 1 times 3, 30 to 90, so we've got 60-day borrowing and lending commencing in 30 days' time. 30 days time is now passed. We're at the start of that 60-day borrowing and lending, and we discover that 60-day LIBOR is 4%. Now, remember what we're doing. If we're long on the FRA, we're paying fixed, receiving floating. Okay, so in this situation, you could immediately see that this count, if we're long, we would have won because we'll be paying the fixed rate. If we're long the FRA of 3.3, and we will receive the floating rate of 4.4. In other words, I'm 70 basis points better off. Okay, and we're going to base this on 1 million notional principal. Okay, and notional just means it never changes hands. Okay, so we're going to value our FRA at settlement at expiry, remember, at expiry, at settlement, whatever you want to call it. So that's our 3.3% fixed. Okay, 30 days have now passed, so we're now at this point here. Here's our new T0, okay? And we discover that 60-day LIBOR is 4%. And remember, we're now entering that 60-day borrowing and lending period. Okay. So we can now work out our overall gain at the end of the notional borrowing and lending period. I'm going to be essentially receiving, remember, I'm pay fixed, receive floating. So whatever I'm receiving, I receive 4%, LIBOR, minus whatever I'm paying. I can't write pay tonight, which is my 3.3%. So I'm 70 basis points better off. Now, what's this term doing? Unannualize. Got to be careful. This and this have been annualized. These are annualized rates. And actually, we're only looking at 60 days borrowing and lending. So we need to unannualize. Okay. So 60 divided by 360, which is 0.167. Okay. Times our notional principal. And that gives us our payoff, okay, or our gain, if you like, to the long party at the end of the borrowing and lending period. Now, it could be exchanged between the two counterparties at in 60 days' time. Could be. It just happens that that isn't really the way they work in practice. What then will happen is typically that this amount here will then be discounted back and actually exchanged between the two counterparties at the expiry of the FRA rather than at the end of the borrowing and lending period. Now, in order to do that, we would need to work out what the present value of $1,167 is. And in order to do that, we need a discount rate. Have we got one? I need a 60-day discount rate. Have I got one? Yes, I have. Let's use 60-day LIBOR unannualized. Okay. So we're going to take 4%, 0.04, unannualize it. So multiply it by 60, divide it by 360. That gives me 0.0066666, etc. And add 1 to that to get my discount rate, 1.006666 recurring. Okay, and then I've just got to take this amount and divide it by my discount rate. When I do that, I get 1,159.27. Hopefully that appeared on your screen. Oh, there it is. Okay, 1159. Don't know why we didn't put the decimal points in, 0.27. And actually that typically is exchanged between the two counterparties at T0. So note that we work out the gain or loss to the counterparties at the maturity of the borrowing and lending, at the expiry of borrowing and lending. We then discount it back and it's physically exchanged as a cash flow at the expiry of the FRA. Okay, so at the start of the borrowing and lending period. Okay, so we now know how to price at T0. We know how to value at the FRA's maturity. The only question we've now got is, what about valuation somewhere after T0, but before maturity. What about the value at any of these points? And that's the last and probably most demanding question that you could get asked in the exam. Okay, so we're going to now value our FRA after initiation, but prior to maturity. Now, 3 keys for valuing a FRA. Number 1, value is determined by rate changes. Absolutely. Now, if you are paying fixed, receiving floating, you are going to win when interest rates go up, because a new FRA would be paying a higher fixed rate and receiving floating. So long FRAs are going to win when interest rates go up. Now, of course, the flip side of that is short FRAs are going to win when interest rates fall. Let's get straight into the numbers. Okay, so we're going to keep our example, our 1 times 3 FRA. That's our FRA that expires at day 30 and then has borrowing and lending that goes up to day 90. So 60-day borrowing lending between day 30 and day 90. We know what the forward price was when we entered the contract. It was 3.3%, and we're assuming notional principal of 1 million. Now, 10 days have now passed, and we're given the new LIBOR rates. Now, the significance is we need to work out what the new fixed rate would be for the same borrowing and lending period. Now, if 10 days have passed, there is now 20 days to expiry. So we're looking at, day 20 being expiry. And if 10 days have passed, we're then looking at day 80 as being the end of the borrowing and lending period. Okay, so what we're going to do is work out what the new fixed rate would be on a new FRA that has the same borrowing and lending period. And we're going to do it by using our 20-day LIBOR and our 80-day LIBOR. Okay. Now, once we've got what the new fixed rate is, we can then compare that to our fixed rate that we locked into 10 days earlier and see whether we've won or lost. Okay, so let's have a look. So here's our situation. We entered the FRA at T0, and the forward price at that point was 3.3%. 10 days have now passed. So 10 days have now passed. Okay, so now the expiry of the FRA, which of course is this point here, is now in 20 days' time, and the end of our borrowing and lending is in 80 days' time. Okay, so what we simply do is unannualize our interest rates, okay, and use them to compute a new forward rate for 60 days borrowing and lending commencing in 20 days' time. Okay. So we just need to work out the fixed rate for a FRA expiring in 20 days with the same 60-day borrowing and lending as our original FRA. Okay. So we've been given 20 and 80-day LIBOR. So our first step is to de-annualize, just like when we were pricing our original FRA. Okay, we're going to de-annualize. So we're told 20-day LIBOR is 2.5%. So multiply by 20 over 360. That gives me 0.00139. And 80-day LIBOR is 3.6%. So here, multiply by 80 over 360 to get 0.008. Then notice we work out the new fixed rate using the same formula. 1 over the long period rate divided by 1 over the short period rate, then subtract 1, okay? And then we're going to annualize as well. So let's do that step first. There we go. 1.00139, the 80-day rate, 1.008, and we're interested in the new fixed rate on a FRA, the 1 plus the 60-day forward rate. Okay, so remember, it's always long period divided by short period. So 1.008 divided by 1.00139. This, again, is just annualizing my forward rate, and I get 3.96%. Now, straight away now, we can tell whether the long party has won or lost. Our long party, 10 days ago, took out an agreement to pay 3.3% and receive floating for a 60-day period. Okay, 10 days have now passed, and now if he wanted to enter an agreement for the same 60-day period, he would be paying 3.96% and receiving floating. What do you want to do? Would you prefer to pay 3.3, okay, or pay 3.96? I want to pay less interest, okay? So therefore, that 3.3% that we've locked into means we've gained. Okay, so interest rates and hence the forward rate in the marketplace has risen, and therefore the long party wins. Now let's have a look at this. What we now do is we say, okay, let's have a look at the difference between our 3.3% and the rate that we could lock into 10 days later, the 3.96%. What difference would that make at the end of the borrowing and lending period? Okay, so I always do this as the new rate, and of course my original rate, the rate that I actually locked into. So 0.0396 is the new rate. I locked into a rate of 3.3%. 60 over 360, well, of course, we've got the 60-day loan borrowing and lending period from here to here. So we're just unannualizing, multiplying by our notional principal, and we can see 1,100 is our answer at the end of the borrowing and lending period. Now, only thing we now do, in order to value it, when I say value something, it's normally what is the current value, i.e. what is the value here at T0. We've just worked out the value here at T80. So the last thing we need to do is discount the value all the way back, not to expiry, T20, but all the way back to the current valuation date, which in this case is T0. And in order to do that, I'd need to use my 80-day LIBOR. So discount it back using 80-day LIBOR. We've already unannualized late 80-day LIBOR, and we got 0.08. So 1,100 divided by 1.008, and there is our answer. We've got a gain here of $1,091.27. Okay, that is how to deal with FRAs. Okay, so it's an area that causes people all sorts of trouble. I think it's one of those areas that when you understand what the maths is doing, it becomes very, very simple indeed. And you have this kind of moment where you go, how did I find this difficult? And it's literally because you just haven't kind of got the full picture. Once you see what you're doing, they become incredibly easy for us. Now, the good news is there will be plenty of people in that exam hall that still cannot deal with FRAs, don't know what they are, don't know what they're doing. They've learnt, some calculations, but they really haven't got any feeling for what they're doing. And as a result, they'll struggle on these. Whereas I expect most candidates that we lecture and we teach, once you go through those techniques, then normally it becomes relatively straightforward. And therefore, I'm expecting candidates to score highly, my candidates to score highly in that area. Sorry. Right, okay, so we move on to our swaps. 3 types of swaps we're looking at in the CFA syllabus. We're looking at the interest rate swap, pay fixed, receive floating. Oh, sounds like a fraud, didn't it? That was pay fixed, receive floating. So what's the difference? Well, of course, a swap is pay fixed, receive floating at each and every settlement date over the swap's life, whereas a FRA is pay fixed, receive floating only once. Now, just like the FRA, though, the price of a swap is the fixed rate, okay? And we're going to determine that at T0, okay? So the rate to be paid by the pay fixed side. Now, the principle is that the present value of the fixed payments must equal the present value of the floating payments. Now, we're going to talk about bond replication in a minute, and it will all become straightforward, and we'll go back to this point. Now, when we go to value a swap, the idea is at initiation, to prevent any arbitrage, the present value of fixed payments must equal the present value of floating payments. However, once we move beyond initiation, then the present value of fixed payments will not necessarily equal the present value of the floating payments, and the difference between the two will be the gain or loss to the counterparties. So swap value is 0 at initiation because this is going to be true at initiation, okay? But it's usually non-zero at initiation because that will be true. This will essentially not be true once we move beyond T0. Right, swaps can be thought of as combinations of bonds, FRAs, and interest rate options. True, there's only one I really want to focus on today, and that is bonds. Now, remember what you're doing with a plain vanilla interest rate swap. Pay fixed, receive floating. Now, let's think about how we could create pay fixed, receive floating using bonds. Pay fixed. Well, how about issuing a fixed coupon bond? So I'm paying fixed, taking the proceeds of that fixed coupon bond and buying a floating rate note, so I'm receiving floating. And that logic of thinking about the two sides of a swap, one is a fixed coupon bond and the other is a floating rate note, that is how all of our bond mathematics work in the syllabus, even though the CFAs, I think, make it obscure at certain times, especially with the interest rate swap. They give you a formula that works in certain situations, but not all. And I think the trouble with looking at that formula is you often miss the fact that you're looking at two bonds. The fixed side of the swap is a fixed coupon bond. The floating side of the swap can be visualized as a floating rate note. All right, they don't use yields. They use LIBORs as their discount rates. But again, we can still think of them as bonds. Now, of course, we could think of them as a series of FRAs, because we know from earlier a FRA is pay fixed, receive floating, but it's a one-off. A swap is pay fixed, receive floating at every settlement over the swap's life. So surely a series of FRAs is equal to a swap. Well, kind of. There's a problem though. In a swap, the fixed rate is the same. The fixed rate is the same at every single settlement date. If you used FRAs, because each forward rate would have a different time to expiry, essentially, you'd end up with different forward rates for each of your FRAs because each would have a different maturity date. So what you would need to use is FRAs that all have the same fixed rate, regardless of what the actual forward rate should be. Now, that means you're using FRAs that don't have a forward price equal to their zero arbitrage price. And those are referred to as off-market FRAs. So it's doable, but not with normal FRAs. Okay, because each normal FRA would have a different forward price. Now, interest rate options, not going to bore you with this really at this point here, but essentially, all you need to be aware of here is long interest rate call option plus a short interest rate put option. That gives us an obligation. That's going to give us pay fixed, receive floating, regardless of the direction of interest rates. Now, I should say those two options need to have the same strike price, okay? But if you do that, you've just created yourself a synthetic FRA. Now, if you can create a swap from FRAs and you can create a FRA from options, you must be able to create a swap from options, and you can, okay? But in terms of the importance of understanding the mathematics behind swaps, it's all about the bonds. So pay fixed, receive floating, I can replicate this, I can generate this by issuing a fixed coupon bond and buying a floating rate note. Okay, so there you go. So fixed rate payer side could be replicated by issuing a fixed rate bond. So when they talk about payer swap, it's always a payer, they talk about payer and receiver, always from the fixed payment point of view. So a payer swap is pay fixed, receive floating, and a receiver swap is receive fixed and pay floating. Okay, so payer and receiver from fixed payment point of view. So we could issue a fixed rate bond, okay, match maturity and payment dates, okay, so there needs to be a coupon date for each settlement date on your swap, and use the proceeds to buy a floating rate note. Okay, remember, this is only pretending that the swap is a bond. So we're not using the yields on bonds, we're going to be using LIBOR as our discount rates here. Okay, but this idea that you can view an interest rate swap as issuing a fixed coupon bond and buying a floating rate note, vital in terms of understanding what the heck's going on with the computations. Now, we know generally that most of our forward contracts need to be set so there is no gain or loss to either counterparty at initiation, i.e. the value needs to be zero, and swaps are no exception to this. So we need to make sure the value of our swap is zero. Now remember, go back to the idea that you've got a fixed coupon bond and a floating rate note. What do we know about floating rate notes at initiation and, in fact, every coupon reset day? We know that floating rate notes trade at par at initiation and each coupon reset day. Now, so if our floating rate note trades at par when the swap is created, for there to be no gain or loss, the fixed coupon bond must also trade at par at initiation. Okay. So that's why we're going to work out the fixed rate on a swap as the coupon rate on our fixed coupon bond so that it trades at par at initiation. Now, the value of a payer swap will be what I receive, the present value of what I'm going to receive, which will be the present value of the floating rate note, minus the present value of what I'm going to pay. And if you're looking at a payer swap, you're paying fixed, you're paying the fixed coupons. So that will be the present value of the fixed coupon bond. So whilst these will both be par at initiation, at any point past initiation, they won't necessarily equal par. Now, we do get a huge break from the CFA Institute these days. Didn't when I did the exam, but you're only ever going to be asked to value a swap immediately after a settlement date. Now, the beauty of that is we already know what the value of our floating rate note is, because at each reset date, it's going to trade at par. So all we actually need to do in the exam is be able to work out the present value of our fixed coupon bond. And that, my friends, is not very difficult. Right, now, first of all, how do we work out the fixed rate in a swap? Already I told you it is the coupon rate on your fixed coupon bond that makes it trade at par. Here we're assuming a par value of $100. Why? Well, we know the floating rate note at initiation trades at par, so the fixed coupon bond must trade at par, so there is no gain or loss. We know what the par value is. We know what our discount rates are. These are just essentially LIBOR rates, essentially. Okay, but these are all based on LIBOR. Remember, it's not really a bond. Bonds would be worse based on yields. Ours is not really a bond. Okay, we're only pretending it is. So we know what the discount rates are. We know what the par value is. The only mystery we have is what should the coupon rate be to make the bond trade at par. So that's what we're going to solve. So first things first, let's get rid of $100 par value and let's use $1 par value. Then our formula becomes $1 is equal to each of the coupons discounted at 1 plus the unannualized LIBOR rates plus the par value at maturity discounted back. Okay. Now, these 1 plus R, these are often referred to as essentially our discount factors. And sometimes they're referred to as either being spot rates or Z factors. Now, notice the Z factor is just 1 over 1 plus the unannualized LIBOR. We'll do some number work on this in just a second. Now, once you've converted your discount rates into Z factors, discount factors, then what you can do is say each coupon times its discount factor. Okay, that's a discount factor, discount factor. A discount factor just means if you multiply a future cash flow by it, you get a present value. Okay, in other words, present value equals future cash flow. I'll just say future value times the discount factor. Okay. Now, we still need to know what C is, what the coupon rate needs to be, so that the bond trades at par. So what we're going to do is just rearrange that formula and you get this. And this is one of those formulas that you just have to know for the CFA exams. It says the coupon rate on our fixed coupon bond so that it trades at par is equal to 1 minus the final period's discount factor divided by the sum of the discount factors. Okay, a must-know formula, absolutely. Because this is how we work out the fixed rate in an interest rate swap, the fixed rate in a currency swap, and the fixed rate in an equity swap. The fixed rate is always 1 minus the final period's discount factor divided by the sum of the discount factors. Okay, Now, what that will do is give us the swap's fixed rate. Now, if you were looking at, let's say, a swap that paid every 90 days, what you would then need to do is annualize, and you do that by multiplying by the number of settlement periods per year. In other words, you could say that's if I was looking at a swap that paid every 90 days, I could multiply by 360 over 90. In other words, 4 to annualize. So again, just like our FRA, where the forward rate was always quoted as an annualized rate, it's going to be the same for swap rates, okay? So it doesn't matter whether your swap pays semi-annually, quarterly, okay? We're always going to quote it as an annualized fixed rate, And remember that fixed rate is the coupon rate. So the bond trades at par. Okay, right, okay, so let's have a look. So we're looking at a 1 year semi-annual swap, trying to keep it real easy here. Okay, so 1 year semi-annual swap. So we've got first settlement date will be day 180, and the second settlement date will be day 360. And we've been given 180-day LIBOR. 180-day LIBOR is currently 3%, and 360-day LIBOR is currently 4%. Okay, so what we're going to do is just take those LIBOR rates, unannualize them, and then convert them into a discount factor. You can see what we're saying here with our little formula here is a discount factor is simply 1 divided by 1 plus unannualized LIBOR. Okay, so let's make sure we can do this. Let's do it for the 180-day rate. So that's 3%. So as a decimal, 0.03. Unannualize that. So times 180 divide by 360. And that gives me 0.015. So I'm going to write this out here. Add the 1. So we've got 1.015. Put it over 1. We'll take the reciprocal. Okay. And when we do that, you get 0.9852. Okay, so let's do the same for the 360-day LIBOR. It's 4%, so 0.04. Well, of course, that is already unannualized. Okay, it's for a year, isn't it? So we don't need to unannualize it. So all we're going to do is 1.04, take the reciprocal. And if you're looking for the reciprocal button on your BA2 Plus calculator, here's my BA2 Plus calculator. Let me see if I can get it in the screen. The reciprocal button is the 1 over x button, okay, which is just above your power of button. That show up? God, not easily, did it? Let me try and show you again. It's just there. Okay. So this time we're doing 1 over 1.04. And when we take the reciprocal of that, 0.9615. So typically in the exam, we've rounded to 4 decimal places here. I'm not keen on that. I would typically say round your Z factors, your discount factors, to 5 decimal places in the exam. Certainly that means you will have no problems in the exam. Examiner tells us we never need to work beyond 5 decimal places in the CFA exam. Right, okay. So let's get a bit of practice in on doing this. We're going to just convert the annualized LIBOR rates into discount factors. We've got we need to calculate the swap rate, which is the fixed rate, and what the fixed payment will be on a 1 year quarterly settlement swap. So the settlement dates are every 90 days. Again, with our swaps, whenever we're dealing with LIBOR in the exam, we're going to assume 360-day count. Okay, so first one, 90-day LIBOR, I'm going to take 4.5 as a decimal, so 0.045. Okay, and simply multiply by 90 divided by 360 to get 0.01125. I'm going to add 1, so I've got 1.01125 on my calculator, and then hit my reciprocal button to get 0.9889, basically. Let's have a look. There you go. Oh, there you are. I've rounded. I've actually gone to 5 decimal places here, which is good. Okay, 180-day LIBOR. So 5% as a decimal, 0.05 times 180 divided by 360, which gives us obviously 2.5%. So 0.025. Add your 1 take the reciprocal, and you get 0.97561. There we go. 270 is exactly the same, so 0.055 times 270, divide by 360, that gives me 0.4125. Add your 1, take your reciprocal, and you get 0.96038. And then, of course, the final one, because it's 360-day LIBOR, it's just going to be 1.06. Hit your reciprocal button, 0.94330. Beautiful. Okay. Now, typically, what will happen in the examiner doesn't want to spend ages calculating discount factors. So he typically gives you, 3 of them, but one of them is missing and you have to complete it before you go on to work out the fixed rate. Okay, so fabulous. We've now got the discount factors for the first coupon, second coupon, third coupon, and the final coupon, as well as the par at maturity. So we can now use our formula. 1 minus the final period's discount factor divided by the sum of the discount factors. So 1 minus 0.94340 divided by the sum of those discount factors, so 0.98888 plus 0.97561 plus 0.96038 plus 0.94340. Okay. And when we do that, we get 1.463. Okay, now that, of course, is the quarterly rate. Okay. And again, remember that when we see the fixed rate quoted on the swap, it will be an annualized rate. So we're going to multiply it by 4, essentially 360 over 90, and we get our fixed rate on our swap to be 5.852%. Okay, now what we're saying, remember, is if this notional bond had a coupon rate of 5.852%, then it would trade at par value, and we know the floating rate note trades at par value, so there's no gain or loss on either side of our swap. Okay, will you be using that formula? If swaps come up, you will definitely be using this formula. Just keep on repeating the mantra, 1 minus final period's discount factor divided by the sum of the discount factors. And you can keep on chanting that until you have some kind of divine reckoning and it actually sinks into your mind and you can't forget it. I mean, it's just burnt into my cortex from where I studied the CFA exam, that formula. But people can't do swaps in the exam. Most people are terrified. Most people are going into that level 2 exam going, please don't be swaps, please don't be swaps, please don't be swaps. They're terrified, no idea what the formula is doing, why it's doing. It's just like a magic number calculator for most candidates in that exam. So if we can be outside that group, if we can be in the group that goes, actually, I understand this, it's just working out the coupon rate on a fixed coupon bond, so it trades at par. Ooh, therefore, the fixed rate on a swap is simply a coupon rate on a bond, so it trades at par at initiation. Why does it have to trade at par? Ooh, because the floating side of the swap can be viewed as a floating rate note. That trades at par, and the two must equal one another. Right, okay, now, of course, in terms of the quarterly payments on the swap, here you would need to take the notional principal on the swap times the unannualized amount, okay? Remember, it's quoted annually. It's quoted the coupon rate, if you like, or the fixed rate on the swap is quoted as an annualized figure. But when it comes to looking at the quarterly payments, of course, we need to unannualize that. So divide by 4. And what we're saying is, therefore, the quarterly fixed rate payment will be $146,300 every time there is a payment on this swap. Right, now, we are going to value the swap. We're going to look at it from the payer's point of view, pay fixed, receive floating. But really, when you come to value a swap, all you do is the present value of what I'm receiving minus the present value of what I'm paying. So if I'm looking at the payer side, I'm paying fixed, receiving floating. I'm going to look at the present value of what I'm going to receive, the floating side, minus the present value of what I'm going to pay, which of course is the fixed side. Now, therefore, to work out the bond's value, it's simply the difference between the current value of the floating rate note and the current value of the fixed coupon bond. Okay, in other words, the present value of replicating our fixed rate bond and the present value of replicating our floating rate note. But remember, we get a huge break here. the examiner only expects us to value an interest rate swap immediately after a settlement date. And that means the present value of the floating side is always going to equal par. Okay, now between settlement dates, of course, the floating rate won't equal par value. But the CFA Institute, in their wisdom, removed a learning outcome statement about 5 years ago now that said compute the present value of a floating rate note between settlement dates. So we used to be able to do this between settlement dates, but we can't. And what the CFA Institute have actually given you here is a formula that we'll look at in a second, which only works at the settlement dates or immediately after the settlement dates. The formula that they give you will not work essentially between settlement dates. Now, here is the way that they calculate it. This is the formula they give you in the exam, and I'm really happy with you using this, but not until you've done it looking at the bond equivalent approach. Okay, so I'm going to do an example where we value. First of all, we'll look at it as two bonds, then we'll use this formula. Now, the idea is initially after settlement, the floating side is always equal to par. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use an approach very, very similar to what we did in when we were valuing our floating rate notes. Do you remember with our floating rate, sorry, not floating rate notes, forward rate agreements, I should say. Do you remember when we valued the forward rate agreement, we looked at the new forward price compared to the original forward price, okay, multiplied by notional principal, divided it by the unannualized, and then discounted it back to the valuation date. Look at this, it's the same thing. So what they're doing is looking at the sorry, I can't speak. The fixed rate on a new swap, okay, minus the fixed rate on our original swap. And then they're saying, oh, hang on a second, divide through by the number of settlements a year, because that is simply unannualizing. In other words, it's taking into account that those fixed rates up here, this and this, are quoted as annualized figures, multiplied by the notional principal to get the net gain or loss, and then discount those back from each of the settlement date on the swap to the current point in time. So the logic is exactly the same as our FRAs. Okay. And what that means is, notice they're completely ignoring the floating side, because the floating side is equal to par. And that's true of the new swap and it's true of the old swap. So they're both, the floating sides are equal to par, they cancel out, we can ignore them. So therefore, CFA Institute is saying, hey, let's value the payer swap as simply by looking at the change in the fixed rate on the swap over time. Okay. But as I said, that only works at immediately after a settlement date. So let's have a look at our example. So we worked out our swaps price. That meant the present value of the fixed coupon bond equaled the present value of the floating rate note, i.e. 5.852%. And we're now going to assume 180 days have passed. Remember, it's a quarterly swap. So originally there was a payment at 90, there was a payment at 180, there's a payment at 270, and a payment at 360. Now, if 180 days have passed, okay, that and that have now gone, okay, so we're now here at T0, which means this is now 180 days away, and this is now, let's not, 90 days away, isn't it? 90 days away, and this is 180 days. So what we're simply saying is, look, after 180 days have passed, we're now at a settlement date that's just passed, and there are only 2 more settlement dates remaining on our swaps life, our quarterly swap with 1 year, 90 and 180. And the examiner has now given us 90-day LIBOR, 3.5%, and 180-day LIBOR, 4.25%. And notice we've computed the discount factors, and we've done it the same way as we did before. First of all, we unannualized the LIBOR, so we did 3.5% times 90 over 360. We then did 1 plus unannualized LIBOR, and then took the reciprocal. So exactly the same as in our previous example. Good. Now, what you're going to do as I said, is we're going to do this two ways. First of all, we're going to look at it using the bond approach. And the way I like to do this is it keeps candidates' minds on the fact that they're viewing a swap as being a fixed coupon bond and a floating rate note, i.e. a payer swap, issue fixed coupon, buy floating rate note. And my issue is when you use the CFA Institute's computation, their formula, you lose sight of that. Okay, so first of all, we'll do it looking at treating it as a bond, then we'll use the formula approach and we'll see we'll get the same answer. The other good reason for doing it using the formula approach is because when we move on to currency swaps, they assume that we'll use the bond approach. So it's really jolting for a lot of candidates. They use this formula for interest rate swaps, then they move on to currency swaps, and they're doing it as if there were two bonds, but they don't really realize that there's two bonds there, and they get really confused. All right, so let's have a go. So we know, because we're at settlement date, we know the present value of the floating rate note, that is equal to par, i.e. $10 million. We know that our fixed coupon bond, well, remember we had a fixed rate of, remember our fixed rate, let me put it up here. The fixed rate on our swap was 5.852%. Okay. So remember, we worked these amounts out earlier. We unannualized that 5.825% by dividing it by 4 to say there are 4 settlement dates in a year. So that gave us 0.01463 as a decimal. Okay, I've done it as a decimal, times our $10 million notional par value, and that's giving us our coupon payments on our fixed coupon bond. And of course, as with all bonds, at the end of the bond's life, you get the par value, i.e. 10 million. Now, all we need to do is discount this cash flow back to our valuation date. And our valuation date was, of course, after 180 days have passed. So all I'm going to do is take those cash flows and discount them back. So the first cash flow is going to be coming back at 90-day LIBOR at our valuation date. And 90-day LIBOR converted into a discount factor we computed on the previous slide, and we got 0.99133. So 146,300 times 0.99133 gives us 145,032. Then we've got to take the cash flows at day 180, which is, of course, the final coupon and the par value, and we've got to discount those back at 180-day LIBOR. And 180-day LIBOR in our example was, as a discount factor, was 0.97919. Okay, so 10,146,300 times our discount factor gives us 9,935,155. Add those two together, and that is the value of our fixed coupon bond. Okay, now you can probably work out therefore for our payer swap, we've lost here because we are paying fixed, receiving floating. So we now do what we receive, the floating rate note, which is par, because we can only do this on valuation dates, remember, 10 million. We subtract what we're paying, and we're paying the fixed rate, i.e. the fixed coupon bond, 10,080,188, and therefore we've got a loss, 80,188. Okay, shall we try doing it using the CFA Institute's formulaic approach? I don't mind you using the CFA Institute's formula. I really, really don't. It's fine, okay? But I like you to see this first so that you're going, oh, actually, it's all about the bonds. Okay, so using the CFA approach, first of all, what we do is we work out the new fixed rate at our valuation date. So we need the 90-day LIBOR and the 180-day LIBOR, convert them into discount factors, and it's the same approach as before. 1 minus the final period's discount factor over the sum of the discount factors. There's only 2 discount factors now until maturity. Then multiplied by the number of settlement dates per year on your swap. So 90-day settlement swap, so that's 4, and that gives me 0.4224. Okay. Now, remember what we then do is we're saying if we had waited 180 days, we would be paying 0.04224, in other words, 4.224%. But we took our swap out 180 days before that, and we locked into paying 5.852%. So what we're going to do is look at the difference in the fixed rates we're paying. Oh, hang on a second though, but these are annualized. So we then better unannualize and then multiply by our notional principal. And what we're saying here for is at day 90 and day 180, we are $40,700 worse off because we are paying at 5.852%, whereas a brand new fixed swap would be paying at 4.224%. Okay. So we're 40,700 worse off. What we now need to do is just discount those two cash flows back. So there you are, 40,700, 40,700, discount them back. First one comes back at 90-day LIBOR as a discount factor. Second one comes back at 180-day LIBOR as a discount factor. Add them together and notice you get minus 80,200. Okay, so slight rounding difference. Look, when we did it the bond approach, 80,188 minus a loss, in other words. When we did it this approach, we got about a $12 difference. Now the reason for that is rounding in these discount factors essentially. So don't worry about that. It certainly won't get you the wrong answer in the exam. Okay. So how did they do it here's the actual CFA approach, therefore. So this is the amount. This gives us our amount of minus 40,700. This is an annuity factor, which is just the sum of the two discount factor. Okay, so that's 90-day discount factor, and that's 180-day discount factor, and you can add them together to get a annuity factor. Okay, 1.97052. And if you multiply your 40,700 by an annuity factor, you get the present value of that annuity minus 80,200. And that's exactly what's going on in the CFA's formula. Here is the CFA formula. So notice there is the new rate minus the old rate. There is the annuity factor. And that, of course, is the number of settlements per period for unannualizing our rates. And there is our notional principal. Okay, minus 80,200. So essentially, if the fixed rate goes down, then the fixed payer loses. Right, that is an interest rate swap. And what I would say really is if you're struggling with that, don't go any further yet. Keep on working some examples, work them in sways or work them in the Institute's material, apply the techniques that we've used in these slides and make sure you feel comfortable. Because if you push forward at this point in time, you'll be moving into currency swaps. And this builds on the knowledge we already have from interest rate swaps. If you haven't got that knowledge, you're building on foundations of sand and it's just going to completely confuse you. Okay, so let's have a look at a currency swap. Now, key point is this uses the same methodology, if you like, that we were using when we were viewing the two sides of a swap as bonds. So we're going to view a currency swap as two bonds. It's just that those two bonds are not in the same currency. Okay. So notice the interest rates used to price currency swaps are the swap rates calculated from each currency's term structure. Okay, so with a currency swap, you've got two currencies involved. People get very confused with what is going on in a currency swap. So let me just take you through the basics of what is actually happening in a currency swap. Let me just get my what do I need? That's the one I want. Let's imagine we have two companies. We have company A, which is, let's say, in the Eurozone. Okay, and company B, which is, let's say, in the US. Now, company A desperately wants dollars. It's a European company, but maybe it wants to expand in the US. It wants dollars. Now, of course, what it could do is go out and borrow dollars, but they might find that expensive because it hasn't got an established credit rating. It hasn't got established lenders in dollars. So often it will find it cheaper to borrow its domestic currency. So what company A actually does is it takes out a domestic loan. Okay, so in other words, euros flow in. But company A, remember, doesn't actually want euros, it wants dollars. Now, on the same time, company B is based in the US. Okay, it wants euros. Maybe it wants to make an investment in the Eurozone. But again, it hasn't got an established track record in the Eurozone. So what it's going to do is it's going to borrow domestically. So it's going to borrow domestically in dollars. Okay, so they're now both companies are sitting on, company A sitting on euros, company B sitting on dollars, when actually they want the reverse currency. Company A actually wants to receive the dollar and company B wants to receive the euro. So what they do is they swap the principal. So the euro principal goes across to company B, and the dollar principal flows to company A. Okay, so they've now got the currency that they want. Now, what currency, what interest are they going to pay? Company A is actually going to pay the dollar interest. Why? Well, company B receives the dollar interest and it uses that dollar interest that it receives to pay the interest on its domestic loan. At the same time, company B is going to pay the euro interest. Company A needs to receive that euro interest so it can pay the euro interest on its loan. Now, people get very confused about which company is the dollar payer and the euro payer in this example. It can be confusing from principal because principal is exchanged at the beginning and at the end of the swap. So unlike the interest rate swap where principal is notional, in a currency swap, the exchange of principal is the whole motivation behind the swap. So it's not notional, it's real principal. Okay, but it's exchanged in one direction at the beginning of the swap and in the other direction at the end of the swap's life. So we're trying to work out who is the dollar payer and the euro payer. Don't look at it from the principal's point of view. Easiest way is to look at it from the interest payment point of view. So in this situation, company A is the dollar payer and company B is the euro payer. Okay, now, alternatively, if you don't like that, you can look at the direction of principal at the end of the swap's life. Because at the end of the swap's life, of course, the dollar principal is paid back, which is nice. Company B takes its dollar principal and uses it to pay off its loan. And at the same time, company B is paying the euro principal back to company A. Nice. Company A takes that and pays off its loan. Okay, and that is essentially the functioning of a currency swap. So either when we talk about being a dollar payer in the currency swap, either look at it from the interest payments point of view or the principal flows at the end of the swap's life, not at the beginning of the swap's life. And that messes lots of people up. They go, oh, hang on, you said company A was the dollar payer, but actually it received the dollar principal at the beginning of the swap's life. Yes, it did. Okay, but it's paying the dollar interest and paying the dollar principal back at the end of the life. That makes it the dollar payer. Okay, so don't look at the exchange of principal at the initiation. That will confuse you, and it confuses many, many candidates. Okay, so that is essentially what is going on with a currency swap. Right, let's get back to our slides. Good. So principal amounts are exchanged at initiation and at maturity. We saw that. Valuation is similar, but because we're looking at two different currencies, we're going to have an exchange rate thrown in there just to make things a bit more confusing. Now, of course, if we were looking at dollar-euro swap like we were talking, we could have receive euro fixed, pay dollar fixed, receive euro floating, pay dollar floating, receive euro fixed and pay dollar floating, or receive euro floating and pay dollar floating. Okay, now, essentially, we are asked here to be able to value a currency swap at any point in its life, not just immediately after a settlement date. What that means is we can't always guarantee that the floating rate side is equal to par. So I think if they're going to test you on how to value a currency swap and you're not at the settlement date, the only one they're going to really be able to test is this one. If they want to test anything about floating, so this one, this one, this one, they would have to be at a settlement date in the exam because to make the floating rate note equal to par, because they simply haven't told you how to value floating rate notes between settlement dates. It's actually very straightforward. It's just not in the syllabus. Now, the fixed rates, we're going to compute those exactly the same way as we did before. 1 minus the final period's discount factor over the sum of the discount factor. And notional principal, we're going to take the notional principal in one currency and convert it into the other currency at today's spot rate. In other words, the spot rate at initiation. We then convert the principal back at the end of the bond's life, or at the end of the swap's life, I should say, at the same exchange rate, because we don't want to build exchange rate risk into the currency flows. Right, okay, so let's have a look at this. A US dollar euro fixed for fixed. So both sides are paying fixed interest. 2-year semi-annual swap with $10 million notional principal was initiated when the exchange rate was $1.05263 per euro. Okay, remember, this is the essentially for the way we need to read the exam is this is the priced currency and this is the base currency. I know that's not how they show exchange rates in the real world. That's how they do it in the CFA Institute exams in both economics and here in derivatives. So unless you follow that convention, you're not going to get the questions right. Okay, so we're told the US dollar fixed rate is 3% and the euro fixed rate is 2%. How would they have got those? Well, it's a 2-year semi-annual swap, so they would have used 180-day LIBOR, 360-day LIBOR. What's 180 plus 360? 540, isn't it? 540-day LIBOR and 720-day LIBOR, and then plug them into our formula, 1 minus the final period's discount factor divided by the sum of the discount factors. So these are computed exactly the same way as we computed the fixed rate on our interest rate swap. Okay, so now one of the first things we need to do in a question like this is work out what is the principal in the other currency. So we've got $10 million. Sometimes in America they write 10 million as 10 mm. I don't know why they use 2 M's. They do occasionally. I've actually asked my American colleagues because I work for Swayzer. I asked them, why 2 M's? And nobody could tell me. Fair enough. Okay, so take your 10 million US dollars, divide it by 1.05263, and that gives us a rather nice 9.5 million euro. And let's think about our dollar payments. Our dollar payments are at 3%. 3% of 10 million, but remember it's semi-annual and that will be annualized. So we've got to use 1.5% annually. So look, there's the notional principal, there's the fixed rate. This is annualizing that fixed rate. And that means the fixed interest payments on the dollar side are going to be $150,000 each period. Let's do exactly the same for the euro side. So 9.5 million euros, our notional principal, times 2%, the fixed rate, times 180 over 360, annualizing that to 1%, and that gives us 95,000 euros. Okay. So, first of all, to understand the flows on our currency swap, initially, counterparty A is going to pass the $10 million to counterparty B and receive 9.5 million euros. Okay. Now, again, remember that principal flow means that counterparty A is going to be essentially the euro payer, and counterparty B is going to be the dollar payer. Okay, and we can see that when we come to look at the interest payments. Okay, so counterparty A is paying the 95,000 euros, and counterparty B is paying 150,000 euros. Okay, and remember we said why company A has taken out a $10 million loan at T0. It needs to receive the dollar interest to pay the interest on its loan. Counterparty B has taken out that 9.5 million loan at T0. It needs to receive euro interest to service its loan. Those interest payments are at day 180, 360, 540, and finally 720. And then, of course, right at the end of the currency swap's life, they're going to swap the principal back. So therefore, counterparty A gives the 9.5 million back to counterparty B, and that means counterparty B can pay off the principal on its loan, and counterparty B passes the 10 million to counterparty A, and counterparty A can pay off its loan. Beautiful. Right, okay, so let's get on to valuation. So 270 days have passed. Now remember, originally we had settlements at 180, 360, 540, and 720. So if 270 days have passed, the first payment at day 180, that's gone, okay. The second payment was 360. Well, if we're at day 270, that's now in 90 days' time. So that's the time to the second payment. That's the time to the third payment on the swap. And that's the time to the fourth payment on the swap. Fantastic. And we're told the current exchange rate is $1.0911 per euro. Now, people get very confused about exchange rates here, what exchange rates to use. And I think what they often want to use when they come to value the swap is they want to use the original exchange rate. And I think the reason for this is people have learned that you use the original exchange rate to swap the principal at the beginning and at the end of the swap's life. So they then want to use that exchange rate to value the swap. And the answer is no. You know, what we do is we use the exchange rate at the day of the valuation, at the date of the valuation. If I was going to, say, here's an overseas bond in euros, what's it worth today in dollars? You would use today's exchange rate to work out that valuation. No difference here. Okay, so we want to value the swap from the perspective of counterparty A. And remember, counterparty A was the euro payer. Okay, as we can see from this. Either remember, look at the interest payments or the final principal payment. Okay, so we're looking at it from the euro payer. And we're still going to value our swap as the present value of what you're going to receive minus the present value of what you're going to pay. Okay, so let's have a look at the dollar side of our swap. Now, we worked out the fixed payments on the swap were going to be $150,000. That's the coupon on our fixed coupon bond. And of course, the par value was 10 million, and that's going to be paid at 450. So we've got a coupon at day 90, 150,000, day 270, 150,000, day 450, 150,000, and the par value of the bond, 10 million. So all we're going to need to do is discount these back. The first cash flow comes back at 90 days LIBOR to our valuation date. Okay, the second cash flow comes back at 270-day LIBOR to get it to present value. And the third set of cash flows, which of course are 10,150,000, come back at 450-day LIBOR, okay, which gives us a discount factor of 0.965018. Add them up, and that is the present value of the fixed coupon bond. Okay, that's the present value, remember, of what they're receiving, because they're paying the euro and receiving the dollar. Now we need to look at the euro side. Now, here it is in euros. So we're just going to do it all in euros, first of all. In order to do this, of course, going back to our rates, when we were looking at the dollar side, we used our discount factors computed from unannualized LIBOR. And I will just take you through this one because people get really freaked out when days are greater than 360. Okay, how to unannualize it? Well, you start with your 2.9% as a decimal, so 0.29, and you actually just multiply by 450 divided by 360. Okay, and you get 0.3625. In other words, 2.9% unannualized over a 450-day period is actually 3.625%. Once you've got your 3.625, add your 1, take your reciprocal, and that's how they've got the 0.965018. Okay, right, okay, so there are the dollar rates. We've also done exactly the same for our Euribor rates, Euro LIBOR or Euribor. Okay, there they are. So now we look at the Euro bond, there it is, and we're going to discount these back at the Euro discount factors. I don't know why my first Euro rate didn't come out. Let's just look, I don't know why. Strange, isn't it? It doesn't want to show up. Let me just go back. That was the missing rate there, 0.995644. Let me just put it in there. 0.99564. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, you add them up, and that is the value of the euro side. Now, trouble is, this party is paying the euro side and receiving the dollar side, but I can't compare them at the moment because they're in two different currencies. So if I said, look, the euro side of the swap is currently worth 9,561,868 euros, what's that worth in dollars at T0? You would take today's today's exchange rate and convert. And that's exactly what we do here. So notice it is the discount rate at here, at the valuation date, not the discount rate when the swap was initially created. Okay, so take your 9.56 million euros, multiply by today's discount rate, 1.0911, and you get $10,432,954. Then, to value the swap, it's just therefore going to be the difference between what you're receiving. I'm receiving the dollars minus the value of what you're paying, and the value of the euro side converted into dollars we just did, 10.4 million. Therefore, overall, we've made a loss here on this currency swap of $342,000. And they're all the same. Every single question works out exactly the same. You might get lucky and one side might be floating and you might be at a settlement date, in which case we always know the value of a floating rate note at a settlement date is par. So that would be even easier. Now, equity swaps. Now, most people have given up by the time they get to equity swaps. So they did interest rate swaps, didn't really understand it, pushed ahead, did currency swaps, completely lost the plot of what was going on. Because basically, if you don't understand the interest rate swap, you're not going to understand the currency swap. So don't even look at the equity swaps. And that's rather sad because the equity swap is the easiest of all three. Okay. Still think of it as pay fixed, receive floating. Okay, you want to pay a swap. It's just that the floating rate side is not now an interest rate, it's the variable return on an equity index. Now, of course, that does mean you've got a kind of quirk that the return on equity index can be positive or negative depending on whether the market has risen or fallen. Now, when we work out the fixed rate side in the swap, it is the same formula, i.e. 1 minus the final period's discount factor divided by the sum of the discount factors. We did that for interest rate swaps, we've done it for currency swaps, we're going to do it for equity swaps. Okay, and essentially working out the value will still be the present value of any payments received minus the present value of any payments made. Okay. Now, the equity side of the swap, if we're valuing that at any point, it's simply the holding period return since the last settlement date. Okay, let's have a look at some numbers behind this. Oh, slide before we get to numbers, sorry. Right, okay, equity return payer. So essentially, if they're paying the equity return, they're receiving the fixed rate. So they're going to pay positive return on an equity index, they're going to receive the fixed rate payment. Now, how do you pay a negative return on the equity index? Well, the answer is you would receive it. So actually, the equity return payer receives fixed rate payments plus any negative equity return. Fixed rate payer. Now, if you're paying fixed, receiving the equity return, they're going to pay the fixed rate, but as well as any negative equity return, and they'll receive any positive equity return. Now, these get people freaked out. There's going to be some massive implication in the valuation. Not at all. Okay, you can forget that. It's true. Okay, it's true for narrative, wordy-based questions, but it's not going to affect your computations at all. So the way we're going to value it is exactly the same way as before. Present value of cash inflows minus present value of cash outflows. The fixed side is simply the present value of your fixed coupon bond as per normal, as with the interest rate swap, as with the currency swap. The equity side, there's no discounting needed because all we're going to do is look at the holding period return since the last settlement date. So we're going to look at the index level at the valuation date divided by the index level at the last settlement date times the notional principal. So that's that little sum there, current index level divided by index level at last settlement date, gives us 1 plus the holding period return up to our valuation date. Okay, multiply it by notional principal, and that's the value of the equity side at your valuation date. Okay, no future cash flows involved here, no discounting involved on the equity side. Okay, let's have a look at an example, try and put this in some kind of context now. So we're looking at a 1-year quarterly equity swap. So we've got a fixed rate of 5.852%. Note that that was what we used in our interest rate swap earlier, if you're wondering where that came from. Okay, so fair enough, 5.825. On day 180, the last payment date, and it must be quarterly settlement date, it is quarterly there we go. Day 180 was the last payment date, okay, and the index at that point was 1,400. On day 240, our index is now 1,330, and we are asked, what is the value of the swap at day 240? Now, again, remember, of course, you originally had payments at 90, 180, 270, 360. We are told 240 days have gone, so that's gone, that's gone. That becomes 30, and that becomes 120, doesn't it? So there's now 30 days to the next settlement date and 120 days to the end of the swap's life. So notice they've given us 30-day LIBOR. They've told us it's 3%. We've unannualized that. So 3% is a decimal, 0.03 times 30 divided by 360. That gives us 0.0025. Add the 1, take the reciprocal, and there is your discount factor of 0.99751. Do the same for your 120-day LIBOR. 4% is a decimal, so 0.04 times 120. Divide by 360 gives us 0.13 recurring, so 0.133333. Add your 1, take your reciprocal, and you get 0.98684. Good. Okay, so we need to value the swap on day 240. The fixed side, look, fixed side is easy. These are our remaining cash flows. So there's the coupon at T30, and there is that is just the coupon, remember? And this, of course, is par plus coupon, and that's at day 240. These are our discount factors, the 240-day discount factor and the 30-day discount factor, giving us a present value. That's just the present value of our fixed coupon bond, $10 million, 158,710. No different to interest rate swaps, absolutely the same way. Now, here's the beauty for the equity index. All we're going to do, and I'm just going to go back one slide, is we're going to say at the last settlement date, the equity index was 1,400. At our valuation date, I can't write anymore. Valuation. At our valuation date, the index is 1,330. So just let's look at the percentage change. Okay, so here we go. 1,330, that's our valuation date. And that's the last settlement. So from the last settlement date, let's just do it. 1,330 divide by 1,400, and you get 0.95, which of course is 1 plus the holding period return. Remember this entire thing here. Okay, so that if you subtract the 1, unsurprisingly, that's it is a 5% decline in your index. So, okay, you get 0.95 times 10 million, and that means the value of the floating equity side is 9.5 million. So it's just 1 plus holding period return times notional principal. Couldn't be easier. No discounting required. So the value of our swap, we're receiving the equity return worth 9.5 million. We're paying the fixed side of 10.158710. So we've lost 658,710. Always remember what you're receiving minus what you are paying. Okay. And so the equity swap is very, very easy indeed. But as I said, most people have long since given up the will to live by this point and therefore can't do them. Do swaps come up in the exam? You betcha. Okay, you betcha they do. They come up all the time. So it's an area that if it comes up, you can almost feel the rest of the exam hall groaning. But I want you to be celebrating as the few people that can actually do these questions. Right, what we're going to do is finish off by looking at a question. I know we're past time, and if you can't stay on the class, then feel free. These are going to be archived and available to you at a later date, so you'll be able to watch them later. So I thought I'd just take you through a question. So we're going to do a question. This is an exam-style question called Plama. Now, it's a bit overly computational because I wanted to focus on the calculations involved here. Right, let's have a look at it. So we've got Plama PLC. They're a swap trader. They're bullish on the FTSE 100 over the medium-term future. So that probably means that if they were looking at an equity swap, they would want to be receiving the equity return. If they're bullish, you know, bulls and bears, bull attacks you like that, price is rising. Bear attacks you like that, price is falling, bulls and bears. Okay, so they think the FTSE 100 will be rising, so therefore they would want to be the receive equity side. Okay. Due to the loose policy of the monetary authorities, okay, so increase in the money supply, real interest rates and nominal rates falling in the market. They're considering entering a 2 million semi-annual equity swap as the equity return receiver. Okay, that makes sense. We thought, hey, look, if they're bullish on the FTSE 100, they'll want to receive the equity return with a notional principal of 50 million. They can either enter the swap as a fixed rate payer or enter the swap as a variable rate payer. There's the value at the time of entering the swap. Okay, so that's going to be maybe important to us, 6258. So that's my value of my FTSE 100. And I'm always annotating on item sets as I'm doing them in the exam, or I was. Said it was a slate and a piece of chalk when I did the exam. To be fair, all of this stuff it was in the exam we've done today. Right, okay, so let's have a look. We've then got the current term structure of interest rates. Now, I'm going to need this to work out any fixed rate side on my swap. I can see immediately that I'm missing one of my discount factors, so I'm going to just calculate my last discount factor. Okay, so I'm going to do 0.0556 times 720 over 360. I actually had a candidate the other day that said, could I multiply by 2 rather than 720 over 360? So I told them no, and they believed me. Unbelievable. Yes, of course you can take shortcuts. I like to write out full so you've got no confusion. You can see that I'm talking about the days that are given in the question. So 0.0556, multiply it by 2. Okay, that gives me 0.1112. We're then going to add 1 to that and take the reciprocal. So our discount factor is going to be 1 over 1.1112. And that gives me a discount rate here and I would use whatever decimal places they've got in the exam. If they haven't given you anything with decimal places in, then go to 5. Here, they've given me 4 decimal places, so that is what I will work with. 0.8999. Lovely. Okay, so I've got that in there. 135 days later, we're told, here's the new value of the FTSE. Okay, so I can see that my FTSE has risen. Nice. Okay. And the term structure of interest rates is as shown in the exhibit below. So exhibit 2 shows me my interest rates 135 days later. Okay, remember it was originally quarterly. I think it's quarterly. Let me just check. It was quarterly. No, it's semi-annual equity swap. Okay, fair enough. So I've got a revised term structure of interest rates 135 days later. Palmer is concerned the loose monetary policy will lead to falling interest rates and considers entering a semi-annual paying interest rate swap as the fixed rate receiver. Oh, we've got a plain vanilla interest rate swap where they're going to enter a receiver. Receiver swap, which means, remember, receiver swap, they're going to receive fixed and pay floating. There we go. That's what's going on there. And there's my notional principle on that. 180 days passed. Term structure of the remaining payments on the swap's life is given in Exhibit 3. So there is Exhibit 3 there. Nice. And also we've got a currency swap, it looks like. Palmer is also bullish on the pound versus the dollar and entered a 2-year currency swap with semi-annual payments in making payments in the dollar. Okay, so if Palmer must therefore have initially received the dollar and is now paying dollar interest and will pay the dollar principal back at the end. Notice we were told here that the swap is based on notional principal of 25 million. Let's underline that. And there's the fixed rate on British pounds, and it pays 5% on the dollar. And there is the exchange rate at the time of initiation. Now, the only time I use that exchange rate at initiation is to work out the principal in the other currency. Okay, so in other words, I've been given the sterling principal here, so I can work out the dollar principal. So $1.64 per pound, so 25 million pounds times 1.64. So dollar principal, 41 million. There we go. So I've got that there. 135 days later, the exchange rate has moved to 172. Now, I would imagine that that will be my valuation date. Don't know that yet. Maybe I'll just put a question mark next to it. And I'll be given US dollars 135 days later. Good. Palmer makes the prediction over the more distant future that US interest rates will increase due to the excessive quantitative easing happening in the markets today. So they think US interest rates will fall long run. Right. Okay. Using exhibits 1 and 2, value the equity swap. Okay. Described in option 1 on day 135. Okay. Right. First of all, essentially, we are going to just have to refresh myself of the details on that. What did we read about the equity swap on this? Our equity swap. Bullish on the FTSE 100. Considering entering a 2-year semi-annual equity swap as the equity return receiver. Okay, so it was 2-year semi-annual. Now, we are told in the question, using exhibits 1 and 2, what is the value of the equity swap on option 1? And option 1 was enter the swap as a fixed rate payer. So first things first, we haven't been given the fixed rate. I'm just going to go back up this information. Here we go. Here was the data there. Haven't been given the fixed rate. But remember, option 1 was enter as a fixed rate payer. So what I'm going to have to do is compute that fixed rate myself using our data here. Now remember, we always use the same approach here. 1 minus the final period's discount factor over the sum of the discount factors. Let me do that in a different color so it just stands out a bit. So 1 minus 0.8999, and I'm going to divide that by the sum of the discount factors, so 0.9815 plus all the way up to 0.8999. Now that will give me my semi-annual fixed rate. Okay, and don't forget, we're going to need to double it to quote it annually. So let's just do this. So 1 minus 0.8999. Fantastic. Let's do all that. Add my rates together. So 0.9815 plus 0.9594 plus 0.9317 plus 0.8999, 3.7725, and then take my numerator, divide by my denominator, and I get a rate out of this as 0.0263 or 2.653%. That would be the semi-annual. Need to multiply it by 2. So as an annual rate, I'd have a rate of 5.307%, roughly. Okay, we could probably round that to 5.31, but I'm going to leave it as 5.03. Okay, so I've got those rates in there. Now we're told 135 days later, here are the rates. So 135 days later, so we haven't even got to day 180. So remember, originally we had first settlement date 180, then 360, then 540, then 720 was semi-annual. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this for a second. Oh, moved. Come back. Oh, that's gone the wrong way. Sorry, guys. Ah, there it is. That's what I was trying to delete. Right, let's have a look at our fixed side first of all. And we need to know our notional principal. You remember it's a 50 million notional principal in this particular case. Right, okay then. So let's think about our timeline. So here we are at our valuation date. First cash flow is in 45 days time, then 225 days time, then 405 days time, and then of course finally 585 days time. What are the cash flows on the fixed coupon bond side? Well, there is the semi-annual fixed rate, 6.53%. Oh, sorry, 2.653%. So 0.02653 times my 50 million part. So I'm just going to get my coupons on my fixed coupon bond. I'm going to do, it's a sterling bond, isn't it? 50 million times 0.02653, half of the annualized rate. And that gives me amounts of 1,326,500 all the way across. Plus, of course, our par value, which was 50 million. Now what we're going to need is to use these discount factors to discount our cash flows back so we can work out the value of the fixed side. So that's coming back, etc. All the way back to T0. So the first one is multiplying by 0.9942. So 1,326,500 times 0.9942, 131,806. Second one coming back at 0.9689 gives us 1285245. And the third one times 0.9370. 1242930 or 931 if I round it correctly. And then the final amount, don't forget the par value of 50 million as well. So 51,326,500 times 0.9093. That gives me 46,671,186. All I've got to then do is add those up. Wish I'd left myself more space now. Add them up, and that's the value of my fixed coupon bond. Okay, and that gives me a value of, when I've summed it all up, 50,518,168. Okay, that's the fixed side. Remember, in this equity swap, they were receiving the equity return. Now, when we looked at our equity return, we're going to need to go from the last settlement date. Well, we actually haven't reached the first settlement date. So in that situation, we're going to take the value of the index at T0 when the swap was initiated and compare it to the value of the index now at day 1 through 5 and multiply by the notional principal. Okay, let's see if I can find a bit of room to scribble this in. I'll do the equity side down here. The equity side is really, really quite nice and straightforward. So we are currently at 6,787 at the valuation date. At the start of the swap's life, it was 6,258 times the notional principal, 50 million. Let's see what we get. And I get 54,226,590. Okay, so remember, they're receiving this. So this is what they are receiving, the equity return. Get the pen out here. They're going to receive this. They're going to pay that. Okay, so it's going to be a gain, you can see, to them. So 4,226,590 minus 50,518,168. And that gives me a gain overall, a gain of about £3.7 million. Let's have a look at the answers then, see if we can see one that is close to 3.7 million. I can tell you no one is more hopeful than me that one of the answers is close to 3.7 million. Scroll all the way through it. Oh, hey, and there you go, 3.7 million. Okay, now essentially using exhibits 1 and 3 value the plain vanilla interest rate swap. Now the good news is, of course, we've already got the fixed rate because we computed it for question 1. Okay, so we've already got the fixed rate. Let's go back and remind ourselves of what it was. There was our fixed rate of 5.307. So we've got that. So we need to use exhibit 3 here for our interest rate swap. So we're at day 180. Okay, so remember, originally we had day 180, day 360, day 540, day 720. 180 days have passed. So we're now at the first settlement date, or just beyond the first settlement date. Actually, I'll give myself a bit more room. Okay, so we have Remember, we worked out, I think is it the, let's just check the notional principle is the same. Let's have a look. Oh, it's 15 million this time. 15 million notional principle. Why did it say that? Sorry, it's not necessarily that easy when you're looking at a computer screen compared to, oh, there it is. There's the 15 million. 15 million notional principle. There is our semi-annual coupon rate, 2.653. So I'm just going to do 15 million times 0.02653. So I've got coupons of $397,950. Right. So my next cash flow is, here's T0, our valuation date. We've got cash flows at T180, T360, and then finally T540. Coupon rate in sterling is 397,950. And we've got the 15 million as well. Par value. Right, okay, so all we're going to do is we're going to take these discount rates here and use them to value the fixed side of our interest rate swap. Now remember, the floating side of our interest rate swap, because we're at a settlement date, that will just be par. Okay, so this cash flow is going to come back at 0.9824, so 397,950 times 0.9824, and that gives me 390,946. This cash flow is coming back at the second rate, so 397,950 times 0.9613, and that gives me 382,549. And then the final cash flows, which of course are a mighty 15,397,950. That's coming back at this rate here. So times it by 0.9336. And that gives me 14,375,526. Add them all up. I get that to come to 15,149,021. Okay. So remember, they're looking at the interest rate swap. Let's just check whether the payer or the receiver, they were the fixed rate receiver. So they would be receiving the fixed amount of 15,149,021, and they'll be paying the floating amount, which is 15 million. So therefore, the gain to them would be 149,021. Notice I've done it using the bond approach. You could choose to use the formula approach. And actually, when I wrote this example in the solution, you can see that actually both methods are available to you. And Helene at the Netherlands Society does have the PDFs of these. So if you would like it and you haven't got access to it at the moment, if you drop her an email, she'll be able to send it to you. Okay, let's see 149021. That's what I'm hoping to see in my answers. Okay, so closest to, there you are, our answer is B. Right, okay, question 3. Using exhibits 2 and 4, value the currency swap. Okay. Let's just check, remind ourselves what exhibits 2 were. So I'm using exhibit 2. Okay, that was UK interest rates, 135 days after initiation, and exhibit 4 is US interest rates, 135 days after initiation. Now remember, we've been told the fixed rates, so fixed rate on the sterling is 5.31 and fixed rate on the dollar is 5%. So So they're making the dollar payments. So they're going to pay dollars and receive sterling. Okay. Now, of course, one of the big clues is when you're worrying about what currency to convert into, is have a quick look at the answers. What currency are the answers in? And they're in sterling. So let's start off with the sterling side of this. Okay. So sterling side. So we've got T0, T45, T225, T405, and finally T585. T585. Right, okay. So on the sterling side, let's put our cash flows in. It's 5%, but be careful, it's semi-annual. Okay, so coupon rates are going to be 2.5%. Okay, and it's based on the notional principal of 25 million. So 25 million times 0.025, and therefore our coupons are going to be 625,000 each period. And 25 million, there we go, 25 million. And we've got to discount them back as per normal using our discount rates. Now, don't use these rates because this is US, okay? And these are sterling amounts that we're looking at first, the sterling side. So we need to go back and use the data in Exhibit 2. So you go all the way back up. These are the discount rates. Oops, don't know what I'm doing there. These are the discount. I can't turn it back into a pen. Come on. There we go. These are the discount rates that we are using. Right, okay. So let's do that then. So 625,000 times 0.9942. That gives me 621,375. This cash flow comes back at 0.9689. So again, 625,000 times 605,563. Next one is 0.9370. We multiply, so we get 585,625, and then that's that one there. And then the final cash flows, huge cash flows, because we've got the par value as well of 25 million. So 25,625,000 times 0.9093, and that gives me 23,300,000. 0.813. Right, add them all up. Okay, and the value of the sterling side is 25,113,376. Okay, fabulous. What we now need to do is deal with the dollar side. I'll try and squeeze it in here. Okay, so we've got the dollar side now to worry about. T45, T225, T405, and T585. Now, first of all, we've got to go back and remember our bond, 25 million in sterling, and we now need the exchange rate at initiation. There it is, 164 dollars per pound. So to convert 25 million pounds times 1.64, our dollar loan. There it was. We'd actually calculated it before, 41 million. And remember, we're told the fixed rate. Oh no. Did I use 5%? I did. I used 5% here, didn't it? The sterling side was 5.31. Oh, agonizing. Agonizing. So that means all those cash flows were wrong, weren't they? Oh, hang on a second. I'll do it really, really quickly and correct them. 25 million. So all my cash flows are out up here, which of course is going to have a ripple-on effect. Actually, I'll show you a shortcut you can do here. If you want to be a bit cheeky and save yourself a bit of time. You don't quite need to do all these computations. Right, okay, so actually, sorry, on the sterling side, the coupons were 663,750. Oops, 750. And then the 25 million. Now, of course, with the coupons, you've got an annuity. So what you can do is add up your discount factors, 0.9937 plus 0.9676 plus 0.9392 plus 0.9095, okay, which gives me 3.81. And then if you apply 3.81, so take all of these cash flows, apart from the par value, and multiply by 3.81, it will give you the present value of all of your coupons in one computation. Then you've just got to discount the par value back as well. Saves a little bit of time, of course. So 3.81 times 663,750 times 3.81. That gives me my 2,528,888. That needs to come back. That will just come back using the final period discount factor. So 25 million times 0.9095. 22,737,500. Add those two together. And we get the sterling side is actually 25,266,388. Fabulous. Okay, that's the sterling side. Oh, I'm just such a plum, aren't I? I'm sorry, that isn't right either, is it? I'm just getting tired here. Sorry, guys. This is what happens when you do it on a computer screen, because those are the dollar interest rates. If I want to discount these cash flows, I need to use the sterling rates. Well, at least I'm showing you all the potential mistakes you could make in one go. It's not actually that hard. This 9689 plus 9370 plus 0.9093. Sorry, I've added those ones up now. Okay, so that means, try it for the nth time, that rate should be 3.8094, and the final period's discount rate, where was it? 0.9093. Okay. Right, okay, I'm doing this for the last time. This time I am going to work out the value of the sterling bond, the pound bond. I'm sure I can do this. I'm feeling confident. Okay, value of the coupons, 2,528,000. 489. Value of the principal, 25 million, times 0.9093, 22,732,500. Add the two amounts together. And you get 25,260,989. Thank goodness. Thank the Lord. Okay. Right. Okay. Now we're going to do the dollar side of this. So par value was 41 million, wasn't it? Dollars. $41 million. Coupon rate was the 5%, so 2.5% semi-annually. So 41 million times 2.5%. One gives us 1,025,000. And of course, don't forget your 41 million. Well, I'm going to take the shortcut approach. I'm going to discount all of my coupons. I'm going to discount all of my coupons at the same rate, an annuity factor. By adding this up, I think I know what it is. It's 3.1, isn't it? having incorrectly used it for my sterling cash flows 2 seconds ago. $3.81, indeed it is. So 3.81 times 1,025,000. So coupons, present value of those at the valuation date, 3,905,250. And then, of course, my 41 million needs to come back at the final period's discount rate, 0.9095. $27,289,500. Add the two up, and remember, this is coming out in dollars. This over here is in sterling. So plus 3,905,250, and that gives me a value of $41,194,750. Right, now I need to convert that into sterling on my valuation date. And we are told in the question, it's up here, that the rate is $1.72 per pound. So I'm going to need to take that and divide it by 1.72 to get pounds. And that comes out at, therefore, in sterling, 23,950,436. Right, okay, now, if you remember, and I'm beginning to lose the plot myself on this, if you remember, it was a very tough question. There's no way you'd see anything this hard altogether in the exam. But remember, they were making the dollar payments. So they were making the dollar payments. So they're receiving the sterling, receiving 25,260,989, paying the dollar payments of 23,950,436. Difference between those is 1,310,553. Is that one of our answers? Please be one of our answers. It's question 3, isn't it? Let's have a look. Where is question 3? We're looking for about 1,300,000. There it is. Oh, look at, there you go. There we are. There's our answer. Last question is prediction of future direction of interest rates. Well, essentially, remember we were told right at the end of the item set here, They think US interest rates will increase in the not too distant future. Okay, now we're asked which of these products will win essentially when interest rates go up. And we're looking at a swaption here. Now, you have payer and receiver swaptions. A payer swaption is an option. First of all, a swaption is an option on a swap, basically. And if you have a payer swaption, if you exercise it, you get left with the payer swap. And a receiver swaption, if you exercise it, you get left with the receiver swap. Now, basic idea is the payer side of a swap will win when interest rates go up. That means a payer swaption will too gain value when interest rates go up. So our answer to question 4 is A. Right, my friends, thank goodness we've managed to make it to the end. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't confuse you too much. So I will close this up now. I do apologise over my, why do I use US discount factors? Is that Guido? Yes, because I stuffed it up at first, Guido, because I'm losing the plot and glanced at the wrong exhibit. Isn't that easy? So easy to do that kind of thing in the exam. Especially easy to do it when you're scrolling up and down on a computer screen. Okay, well done, guys. You've made it to the end. Swaps is a very, very difficult topic, so we'll call it a day here. I think essentially this will be as well archived and put on the Netherlands Society web pages in a couple of weeks' time, so it should be available then. Lovely. Thank you very much. I'll end it now.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's really been great again. The lively way and the committed manner that you're discussing these topics, and you've managed to almost fill up 3 hours, which is comparing to a real CFA exam, at least half of it. So it's a good preparation in that case as well. Thank you everyone for joining. I will send the presentations and the recordings to you later this week.